We'll go ahead and start our meeting for today. We're the Santa Barbara City Council. It's July 23rd, 2019. We'll do our Pledge of Allegiance now. We take a roll call, please, Madam Clerk.
Certainly. Councilmember Dominguez. Councilmember Rouse. Yep. Councilmember Snedden. Here. Mayor Pro Tem Friedman.
Here.
Councilmember Harmon. Here. Councilmember Gutierrez.
Here.
And Mayor Murillo.
Here. Thank you. Changes to the agenda, Mr. City Administrator?
Yes, Madam Mayor. Item 19, the last item on the agenda, the closed session regarding conference with labor negotiator. We'd like to continue that 1 week, so we'll bring that back next Tuesday.
Thank you so much. We'll go to open public comment. This is our opportunity to hear from the public on matters that are not on the agenda. Carolina Bate, you'll be first. You have 3 minutes up at the mic. There's a timer there. Holly Perea is at the back of the chambers, and she'll make an appointment with us or try to get staff answers for you. We can't really engage in dialogue during the open public comment. Ms. Abate, go ahead. Ms. Abate, thank you.
Santa Barbara City Council members and the public, thank you for allowing me to tell some of the statistics about how President Trump continues to grow our economy. At the heart of a strong economy is a low unemployment rate. Our overall national unemployment rate is at an incredible low of 3.7%. The stock market has a record high value, resulting in over $20 trillion of wealth. This wealth has been distributed throughout middle-class America by increases in people's 401ks and retirement plans from the more than 6 million new jobs President Trump has created. If you listen to the news, you are led to believe that President Trump's policies only benefit wealthy Americans. But that's not true, because the latest data from June shows wages for the lowest quarter of income earners grew by 4.5%, which is a faster rate than any other income group. Also, the news will lead you to believe that President Trump's tax cuts only benefited wealthy corporations. The tax cuts did benefit wealthy corporations. However, because we live in a capitalist economic system, those wealthy corporations then use their profits to invest back into their companies. The statistics show this because after the tax cuts were signed into law, capital investment jumped 21%. When companies are investing their profit back into their business, it means they are doing things like opening new branches in other areas or putting money into new product research and development, for which they then need to hire people, which in turn creates jobs, which then leads to the low unemployment rates that we see in our country. So, when you hear candidates campaigning on socialism, please think very carefully about what they are saying and keep in mind the statistics and information from this presentation. And remember, it is the capitalist economic system that has produced the innovation, variety, and abundance of high-quality goods and services that we enjoy in our country. Capitalism, as we are seeing, is the best way to create the highest standard of living for the greatest number of people. Statistics taken from the United States Department of Labor and the Bureau of Economic Analysis. Thank you, and may everyone have a good afternoon.
Okay, Monica Cristina Ramirez is next. Michael Baker and Phil Walker will be the final speaker. Ms. Ramirez?
Once again, I'm going to have to bring it to the attention that I am Kachuma, Native, and Deutsch. I need to let people know that I am not Hispanic, I'm not Mexican, and I'm not Latin. I have been arrested once again for nothing, served 4 days in jail for doing nothing. I'm here speaking for the people who are being deprived and despaired of their human rights, civil rights, and parental rights. Many of the homeless that are not in shelters are suffering from physical ailments that is painfully debilitating. Us, the homeless, are exhausted because we need to keep moving so we don't go to jail and or be harassed by local businesses. We are targeted individuals. They are attacking us and threatening our lives with toxic fumes. The Santa Barbara Police Department is being used to harass the homeless. The Lower East Side, the industrial area, is where the homeless were placed. We don't have anywhere to go except for right there, because that's where free food is and the shelters are, and that's where we're out of sight. The businesses need to know that there is a law against hate. There's such a thing as the no hate crime. Now, I am a victim of the Victim Witness Program, and there are many victims out there that are physically disabled. We are being victimized. They are victimizing the victims that are physically disabled, coming out of Cottage Hospital. I mean, we need some sort of respect and humanity and civil rights actions being given to us. Please, we are not mentally ill. We are not going to get services from shelters unless we are mentally ill, we are a criminal, we are suffering from chemical substance or controlled substance drugs or alcoholic, and that's the only way we can receive services. If we are physically disabled, we don't get services. My son was kidnapped, and I have made numerous reports to the Santa Barbara Police Department that he's being held hostage. I don't appreciate this at all. Tom Miller called me a liar, and I was put in jail for 4 days. I need help. I'm a good citizen. I was born here. It was a volunteer work at the Trinity Lutheran Church, and I need assistance. My son was kidnapped. My son Dakota was stabbed, and we have a 10-year protective order against Robert Lee Howard. Mary Howard has got my son, Scott Howard, and I have not seen my son in 3 years. I am asking to tell you, I don't want to die out there on the street.
Thanks, Ms. Ramirez. Your time's up. But thank you.
I want help.
Thank you for
Please
coming.
recognize us as humans.
Mr. Baker, your turn.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. My name is Michael Baker, CEO for United Boys and Girls Clubs. Summertime's incredibly busy at the Boys and Girls Club, so I don't have a lot of time to be here, but I just wanted to remind you each to come on down any given time to stop into any one of our clubs, see what's happening. Oscar, thank you for coming to the Boys and Girls Club. It meant a great deal to me to have you stop by there for the No Kid Hungry program. And as you may be aware, 97% of the kids that go to our West Side facility are on the free reduced lunch program in schools. And I can tell you that how important food is to these children. And the mobile cafe, if it wasn't coming to the Boys and Girls Club in the summers, it's great when, you know, as someone that was on the free breakfast and lunch program growing up, I was one of those kids, not here in Santa Barbara, but in upstate New York. I can tell you how important that program is. And when you get to the summertime, it's wonderful when you have school day and you have breakfast and lunch provided to you by the federal government, which is incredibly important. That's fantastic Monday through Friday during the school year, and then on Saturdays at the Boys and Girls Club. But when the summer rolls around and there's no school, that means there's no breakfast and there's no lunch for a lot of these kids. So that's why it's so important for us to partner with the Santa Barbara Unified School District. And I can't emphasize enough how much gratitude we have to Nancy Weiss and her whole department on feeding our kids every single day. So those of you that want to know how important that program is, talking a couple hundred kids every single day that are eating, that would not be eating if it wasn't for that program. So thank you all very much.
Thank you, Mr. Walker. And then Mark Marshall Wofford will be the final speaker. Thanks, Mr. Baker.
Good afternoon, Madam Mayor, members of the City Council. Little Carpinteria has done it good as far as bike safety here, and maybe the city could take a lesson from that and emulate it, because everywhere I go, you know, I was walking down the Cabrillo and Stearns Wharf area on the weekend, and it was Surrey's and various sizes and shapes and whatever of bikes all over the sidewalk, and it was just like somewhat controlled chaos. But, you know, I'll read a couple little items from this. Bicycle safety tips: obey the rules of the road. Then it's in capital letters, you can't overlook this. Do not ride bikes on sidewalks. Obey traffic signals and stop signs. Be predictable. Be visible. Check your bike before you ride. They have a ABC quick check, air brakes, chain, quick release. I guess that's of the tires. And then the golden rule: be kind to drivers, walkers. Be curious, give respect, get respect. You know, as far as the homeless issue is concerned, it's very concerning. I was talking to a gentleman yesterday down by Crown Liquor and Milpas Rentals area. He was on a walker, but he had reached the point where he was scared straight and got into rehab. He doesn't drink anymore, but turns out he was in Oak Park where a fellow there was throwing some rocks, and one of his buddies was throwing rocks at raccoons. They put out, I guess, like a Masonic distress call, and pretty soon there was a extreme extended family of raccoons that appeared out of nowhere, and he said they were foaming at the mouth. Whether they were rabid or not, that's open to speculation, but just that fact scared him to get into rehab. So sometimes good things happen when it's not so good. Take care.
All right. Thank you for that. Mr. Wofford? Where'd he go? There he is. And you're the final speaker. Thanks.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Mark Wofford. Listen, I've been doing a lot of searching, soul searching, and I'm in a lot of pain. I'm trying to get Pilgrim Terrace to help me out, and they said they would. I tried to make an appointment the other day with Miss Hawley, and I can't. For what reason? I keep making appointments that happen to turn up on the same day. I have something else going on. And the coincidence is getting, I don't know, pretty absurd, but I've been coming here for over a year, and up on Delavina and Coda, Behavior Health, they won't help me as well. There's a guy up there named Luis Alvarez, I believe, and he's been going up to that Rocky Nook Park and picking up a couple of people, I'm not going to mention names, and driving them to a nice little apartment, and a couple of the guys I grew up with. Furthermore, he said he didn't do that. That wasn't his kind of work. He said, I don't drive. It's not my job to find you a home either. So I'm at a dead end. You guys, please work with me. I can't do this anymore, okay? I'm going to be 60, and I can't. I'm old, and I don't feel good, okay? Thank you. Have a blessed day.
Okay. That closes public comment, and we'll go to our consent calendar. Madam Clerk, do you have some items to read, please?
Yes, Madam Mayor. Item 1, introduction of ordinance for outdoor dining license annual fee. Recommendation the council introduce and subsequently adopt by reading of title only. An ordinance of the Council of the City of Santa Barbara amending the municipal code by amending section 9.95.080 relating to outdoor dining licenses. 2, extension of memorandum of understanding with hourly bargaining unit. Recommendation that council introduce and subsequently adopt by reading of title only. An ordinance of the Council of the City of Santa Barbara amending ordinance number 5805, the 2017 to the 2019 memorandum of understanding with hourly employees bargaining unit to extend the term of the agreement through June 30th, 2020 and provide pay rate increases for certain classifications. 3, adoption of ordinance of the Council of the City of Santa Barbara approving a Fourth Amendment to the lease agreement 200846 between the City and Mercury Air Center Santa Barbara, Inc., DBA Atlantic Aviation, a California corporation. Resolution the Council adopt by reading of title only. An ordinance of the Council of the City of Santa Barbara approving a Fourth Amendment to lease agreement number 200846 between the City and Mercury Air Center Santa Barbara, Inc., DBA Atlantic Aviation, a California corporation. Item 4, adoption of ordinance amendments to Chapter 30.150 for inclusionary rental housing. Recommendation the Council adopt by reading of title only an ordinance of the Council of the City of Santa Barbara amending Chapter 30.150 of the Santa Barbara Municipal Code pertaining to inclusionary housing requirements for the average unit size density incentive program. 5, resolution of the Council of the City of Santa Barbara implementing Section 414H2 of the Internal Revenue Code with regard to CalPERS pension cost sharing under Government Code Section 20516F. Recommendation the Council adopt by reading of title only a resolution of the Council of the City of Santa Barbara implementing Section 414H2 of the Internal Revenue Code with regard to CalPERS pension cost sharing under Government Code Section 20516F. Item 6, records discretion for the Waterfront Department. Recommendation the Council adopt by reading of title only a resolution of the Council of the City of Santa Barbara relating to the destruction of records held by the Waterfront Department in the Waterfront Office. And item 7, increase to maximum hourly rate for limited or temporary hourly classifications. Recommendation the Council adopt by reading of title only a resolution of the Council of the City of Santa Barbara amending resolution number 19041, the position and salary control resolution for fiscal year 2020, affecting the maximum hourly rate of limited or temporary hourly classifications effective July 30th, 2019.
All right, thank you very much. If there's no further objection, we'll waive further reading, and I'll ask for a motion to move the consent calendar forward.
So moved.
That was Friedman. Harmon, I think, was a little quiet, but she beat you to it, Mr. Rouse. All in favor? Aye. Very good. We had an ordinance committee meeting today. Ms. Sneddon, what happened?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. We forwarded with unanimous approval recommendations for changes to municipal code pertaining to park closing times, playgrounds, aquatic facilities, use of portable grills and stoves, and expanding the off-leash dog area to Mackenzie Park. So that'll be coming to council.
And we encourage everyone with dogs to go to the off-leash park. They're really popular, and everybody's loving it right now. Thanks, Ms. Sneddon. We go to number 16, Ms. Clerk.
Yes, Madam Mayor. Item 16, work session on the Strategic Energy Plan and evaluation of the feasibility of establishing community choice energy.
Mr. Four, whenever you're ready.
And good afternoon, Madam Mayor, council members. I'm going to start with introductions because we have quite a team effort today. I'm Matt Four. I'm the Senior Assistant to the City Administrator. With me is Alelia Parento, the Energy Program Supervisor, and Sarah Connect, the Assistant City Attorney. Also in the first row here is Ms. Barbara Boswell. She is a member or a principal with the California Choice Energy Authority, which we'll be speaking about later in the presentation if you do have questions. We're here today to bring two big topics to you, things that we've been working on for a long time that have been on parallel but related tracks. The first is a strategic energy plan that your council commissioned that we've been working on. The second is a big component of that plan, which is community choice energy, and we're here to merge those together today. I'll mention that today is a work session. We're not asking you to make decisions today. We're going to give you a whole lot of information that we've worked through with two different ad hoc committees, the Sustainability Committee and an ad hoc Community Choice Energy Committee. And then next week, we're going to return to you, to this council, to make some decisions. All right. So we're going to cover today, we're going to start off with the final draft of the Strategic Energy Plan. Then we'll go into a little bit of background on community choice energy. We want to key in on a key nexus between the Strategic Energy Plan and community choice energy that really had a bearing on how we came up with our options and ultimately our recommendations. Talk a little bit about two feasibility studies that were recently completed, the work that the Community Choice Energy Subcommittee undertook, and finally our recommendations and next steps.
All right, good afternoon, Madam Mayor, council members. As you'll recall, about a year ago or a year and a half ago, council passed a 100% renewable electricity resolution and also directed staff to develop a strategic energy plan to achieve that goal. So in January of this year, I came and did a fairly in-depth presentation of the strategies we had developed as part of that plan. And today I'm just going to give a brief recap of the final strategies and give you a sense of where we are. But to start off, when directed to put together the Strategic Energy Plan, Council gave us a set of priority directives. And we use those priorities to develop each of the strategies. And those priorities included grid reliability. We wanted to make sure that our business owners and residents had reliable power, enhanced disaster resiliency, certainly in the face of our position at the end of the Southern California Edison transmission lines. No use of renewable energy credits. We wanted to make sure we were affecting real renewable power development and not just buying our way out of the problem. And promoting local economic development, creating jobs, generating local revenue, and decreasing greenhouse gas emissions. The strategies that we came up with were organized under 5 program areas, the first of which was energy, partnerships, and organizational structures. There were 3 strategies under that program area. The first was to formalize an energy and climate program that basically entailed hiring adequate staffing to implement the strategic energy plan and take advantage of the nexus between energy and climate efforts to really maximize and oversee the implementation of strategic energy plan and the climate action plan. So the next strategy was to pursue community choice energy. This really is the most impactful strategy in the plan, and you'll hear a lot more about it today. And then the third was to participate in a regional climate collaborative, which is an effort that is currently underway with the county and some neighboring jurisdictions. Next is community engagement initiatives. One of the pieces of information we received through our stakeholder engagement process was that people simply don't know what resources are available to them. So we really want to launch a robust community education and outreach program that will really bring that information to our community and relate it to what's happening in our community. In tandem with that, we would create a one-stop shop or a hub, if you will, for all things energy and climate related, whether that's technical assistance, educational opportunities, or just information. The third program area was funding sources and financial incentives. This is fairly straightforward, but also grew out of the stakeholder feedback that we received, which was perceived or real upfront capital burden of putting in solar or energy efficiency projects. So the idea behind this would be to develop an incentive program, particularly one for solar and battery storage projects that are combined. And the intent is not to fund the project, but to develop just enough incentive to tip the project into feasibility. Another funding mechanism that was entertained in the strategies was on-bill financing or some other low or no interest financing program, similar to what the utilities have today. The fourth program area was municipal pilot projects. The first was to pursue a community solar program. This is not something that's currently in existence in our area. And it typically is building a large-scale renewable project and having multiple or many off-takers. In a CCE scenario, the CCE could purchase the power generated by the community solar project. And in a non-CCE or community choice energy scenario, many community members could be the off-takers. The second pilot was to create a smart energy zone. I like to think of this as a living laboratory for all of the strategies we're discussing today, or even potentially local programs we develop in the future, to see how they're working, get some feedback from the community. We've identified a part of town that we really like for this living laboratory because it contains all of the customer classes we would want to hear from. And that is SOLA to Yananali, Milpas to State Street, and it's got educational, government, industry, low-income residential, high-income residential. So we really liked the fact that it had everybody we wanted to hear from. And then this is not a pilot because we're already doing this, but to continue to develop energy resources on city facilities and really lead by example. And the last program area was administrative policies and procedures. We also heard from our stakeholders that there's a perception of burden when trying to get a permit for energy efficiency projects. We would really want to work with Building and Safety to educate the public about these expedited permitting processes for certain energy projects and work to iron out any hiccups that are existing. Another strategy is a local energy code enhancement, otherwise known as a REACH code, which would just be us developing our local energy code that goes beyond the state requirements for energy efficiency and renewables. And then lastly, developing a building energy score policy. This is currently happening all over the country, and there are many models that we could follow for this. For example, one model shows that at point of sale, you would have to disclose an energy score so that your buyer has some sort of idea of how your building performs. Or City of LA is currently entertaining that all commercial buildings must disclose an energy score on an annual basis, and then there's repercussions depending on how you're scoring. So we intend to launch implementation of the strategic energy plan at mid-year fiscal FY20. And this looking out through FY20 and FY21 is what we would tackle first, primarily the Energy and Climate Program and Community Choice Energy, but we would want to be working on these other strategies at the same time.
Okay, before I move on to community choice, I just want to stop for a second. Any questions on the strategic energy plan? Okay.
I just didn't get a good look at the last slide. Sorry, that was
Sure.
super quick. Sorry. Okay. Maybe I was slow.
No, take your time.
Good. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so as Ms. Parento said, community choice energy plays a big role in the strategic energy plan. It's a good pathway to achieve many of our goals. But I just want to go do a little bit of background, just very briefly for the audience. I think you're all aware of how this works. Currently, under our current model as Edison customers, Edison procures the power that we use. They then distribute the power through their own grid, through their transmission and distribution system. Under community choice energy, the aggregator, as it's called, or the entity, in which case would be the city of Santa Barbara, makes choices and procures energy on behalf of its customers. You're in charge of the portfolio. You decide what the renewable content is, from whom we procure that, and then Edison continues to transmit that energy through its grid. The entity then is competing in the marketplace for those both renewable and non-renewable resources that we are using to energize the grid and serve our customers. So we're competing there. The interesting thing about CCE is it's really a behind-the-scenes endeavor. If we do this right, the customers don't really notice a difference. The bill still comes from Southern California Edison. It just is in two pieces, the generation cost and the transmission and distribution cost. But if we do this right, it's very much a seamless experience for the customer, but you're in control of our portfolio and the decisions related. In July of 2018, after a number of technical studies that we undertook in concert with other local jurisdictions, staff came to you and said, we think we found a feasible pathway to establish community choice energy. This council even adopted a resolution to that effect to direct staff to go work with the local jurisdictions to form a JPA and get this up and running. At that time, shortly thereafter, a lot changed in the energy landscape, some big dramatic changes. And the energy landscape changes a lot, but we had one big regulatory decision that was pending having to do with the departing load charges. That is a big piece, I'll go into that later, a big piece of the customer bill that would really impact the pro forma. We lost North County participation, namely cities like Santa Maria that would have added, it would have buoyed our pro forma and added a lot of revenue. So there were some big changes, and we got into this and then held up. So then your council commissioned us to go out and refine that original study. Same author, same consultant, and said that the question is, after all these changes, after we've accounted for all these, are we still viable? We were viable in July of 18. Are we still viable now? And that's what we're here to discuss today. So the whole point of this is not the first study that we're bringing to you that shows that we're viable. We're answering the question of whether we still are.
So then within the context of the strategic energy plan, we really wanted to evaluate CCE slightly differently than is typical. In a typical evaluation of a CCE, you look at the financial impacts of the CCE or the stability of the CCE. So you're looking at whether customer rates are competitive with the utility. You're looking at whether you're able to retire debt early. You're looking at whether you're able to meet target reserves quickly. And we looked at all of those things, but we also looked at a number of policy drivers coming out of the strategic energy plan, and certainly in relation to Council's 100% renewable electricity goal. Because CCE accounts for such a large portion of reaching that goal, we wanted to make sure that we gave it a lot of thought. And it also, beyond the 25%, CCE allows for multiple mechanisms that allow the other strategies to be implemented. So it's very, very impactful. Why is it so impactful? CCE is an opt-out model as opposed to opt-in, meaning that when the Community Choice Energy Organization is formed, the entire service territory is defaulted into it. People have the option to opt down or out at that point, But instead of having to encourage every single business owner or resident or community member to come along on our journey to 100% renewable electricity, we sort of get to bring everybody into the fold right away, and then they can make a choice from there. Additionally, the renewable energy content is significant. With Community Choice Energy, the CCE organization decides what the default rate is. So the CCE could decide that everyone is defaulted in at 100% renewable content, and we've, for all intents and purposes, met our goal at that point. Additionally, reliability and resiliency. CCE allows for a funding source to build local renewable projects and develop local programs that would really accomplish the goals of the Strategic Energy Plan and our Climate Action Plan and other policy drivers the city follows. Really importantly is local control. We really liked, the subcommittee really liked the idea of local control. And what I mean by local control is the ability to set rates specific to your community. You can set rates based on context and load profile. You can set rates to encourage local actions such as electric vehicle adoption, solar deployment, et cetera. And again, that revenue stays local, so you can then reinvest it into the community and into programs that affect real change here. And like I mentioned on the previous slide, we get to make the power content decisions. So is it renewable content? Is it carbon content? And those are all policy decisions that the CCE board would make.
Okay, so with that broader framework of feasibility and policy considerations, then we'll go into what the results of these studies were. There were 2 studies that were commissioned in tandem. The city participated in both. The first was a Santa Barbara County study where we further refined the original study that said if the unincorporated county, Goleta and Carpinteria and the city of Santa Barbara were to go into this together, what would that look like? The city of Santa Barbara then commissioned its own study to say, what if the city itself were to form its own standalone CCE? What would that look like? Interestingly, the findings and the conclusions of the study were pretty similar in both configurations. But the methodology of this is just like any other business pro forma. We take what our total costs are going to be for a year-over-year projection, what our revenue requirement is. We then spread that revenue requirement across the customer rates. We used Edison's structure as it stands now, so we could compare apples to apples. And then we compared what the CCA rates would be compared to what Edison customers are paying today. This chart, I just thought that to boil down the financial pro forma, for those of you that looked at it, the costs really boil down into 3 primary object categories. The first is power supply. Power is expensive, and our energy load is big. And so the power supply costs are about 71% of the overall financial pro forma. The second category, which you don't see explicitly on the pro forma but is embedded in the power costs, is something called the departing load charges. We've talked about those with council multiple times. But what the departing load charges are, in essence, is a mechanism to keep Edison and the investor-owned utilities whole for power that they have contracted on behalf of the customers that used to be their customers before they were withdrawn into a community choice energy entity. So you can imagine City of Santa Barbara now as an Edison customer. Edison's procured power on our behalf, and all of a sudden we're lifted up and taken out of their customer base. Well, to keep Edison whole for the power that they contracted on our behalf, Edison then charges us fees in the form of departing load charges to keep them whole. It's a big number. It's about 18% of our overall revenue requirement. In the early years, that's a headwind. Having 18% of your budget go toward these departing load charges is a big number. Looking at it as an opportunity, though, in the out years, because eventually these contracts will expire. Our obligation will terminate. And so looking at the out years, 18% of our pro forma is a big opportunity, and that's a lot of dollars that we can then use in the out years to create programs and to make preferable incentives and things like that. The other piece of the pro forma are our reserve contribution and a lot of professional services. This is a really complicated enterprise, and we're going to be using a lot of advisors. Energy forecasters, procurement specialists, technical specialists, and legal advice. regulatory filings, and all those things. And so that rounds out the last category. So the findings of both studies were fairly consistent with one another. And based upon the financial parameters that we set up in terms of what makes for a sound community choice energy entity, what would put us on strong financial footing, the studies found that pegging our rates specifically to what Edison charges now is not feasible. It's going to take some amount of rate premium for us to compete with Edison in Edison's territory. So what we found is that when we did peg our rates to Edison outright, we could have positive cash flow, but we did not accrue financial reserves and things that were risk protections that would put us in strong footing to deal with changes in the marketplace and in the energy landscape. So the consultant found that a rate increase of about 1.5% to 2% would be required just to compete with Edison based on where they are now, based upon their renewable content today. The second trend is kind of intuitive, and that's the further that we increase our renewable portfolio supply, the more of a rate premium is required. So to go from 50% renewable, for example, to 75% renewable was about a 5% increase in customer rates, 3 to 5%. The last finding, and this came out of the city-only study, we asked, keeping in mind Council's goal of 100% renewable energy, could you put together a pro forma that would allow us to get to 100% renewable? And they found that. And so so we'll go into another, we'll focus on that scenario, but we did find a pathway that we think is viable for us to go to 100%. The final finding, and this is kind of nuanced, but it's an important point, is that residential customers create more favorable financial margin than large generators. And so that will come into place in terms of how we phase in customers, for example. Large customers use a lot of energy, but they don't pay as much per unit volume as residential and small commercial. And so that's as we look at how to set this up and how we might serve customers over the long term, that's just something to keep in mind. We then worked with the CCE subcommittee, and I'm going to ask you not to delve too far into this chart yet. But we met 3 times with the Community Choice Energy Subcommittee. It was Councilmember Sneddon, Councilmember Friedman, and Mayor Murillo to really dive into a number of options related to CCE. We studied 5 different scenarios. We looked at Monterey Bay Community Energy or Community Power. That's a Monterey Bay CCE that was sort of courting jurisdictions in this area. We looked at the Clean Power Alliance, the Los Angeles Joint Power Authority. We looked at the Santa Barbara Regional, this county, Goleta, Carpinteria City. And then we looked at a couple of configurations of the city only as a standalone entity. You can see on the left side of this chart, I will draw your attention just briefly to that we looked at a number of policy drivers and characteristics that would meet broader city goals or would use CCE as a vehicle to meet broader city considerations. The point of this chart is we looked at a number of things, and where you see green was a policy driver or a desire on the part of the city that would be fulfilled by a certain CCE configuration. The CCE subcommittee was very helpful early on. They gave us 3 priorities that they wanted us to focus on in terms of the CCE configuration that we would ultimately recommend. The first was having a 100% renewable default option where we could default all customers in at 100% outright. The second was local control. The subcommittee felt very strongly that retaining local autonomy and as many decision points as possible was an important point. And thirdly was a launch date as early as possible. And based on regulatory and statutory requirements, that would be 2021. So with those 3 as primary policy drivers, we ended up eliminating the other options and focusing on the city as a standalone CCE entity. So now I'm going to focus exclusively on what that scenario looked like. And the scenario as modeled by our consultant, for those of you that read the report, this is scenario 4. It would be a 100% renewable energy default option serving all customers, residential, commercial, and industrial. We also took we had to make some assumptions, and the consultant had to make some assumptions about opt-out rates. And we wanted to be sensitive to the fact that to the extent that we are raising customer rates over what they're paying to Edison, we want to be conservative in the number of customers will say, no, I'll stay with Edison, with the incumbent provider. So we took a very conservative approach with that. And where we assigned a rate premium, we doubled the default assumption on opt-out from 10% to 20%. Now, I can tell you in practice, even with jurisdictions that have gone this route and gone 100%, they haven't come near 20%. So we were conservative. We also added another option, which is opt-down. In many cases, it's in the city's best interest to get customers into the fold, even if we can't have them at 100% in the early years. So we wanted to have an opt-down option where, for example, a large user may, in the early years, start at something less than 100%, and as we build reserves and as we have excess revenue, we might be able to create favorable rates that would attract them to 100% renewable. Under those scenarios then, under this scenario with that rate premium, we would realize positive cash flow after year 1. We would achieve our reserve targets by year 5. The scenario assumed a startup working capital of $4 million. Now, I will say that the model is a 0% interest. That was at our request. We asked the consultant to make the most feasible, financially feasible option we could have. But we'll figure out what the loan is and what the interest rate would be later. Under this scenario, then, the customer rate impact would be between 6 and 9% over what they're paying in relation to Edison now, depending on customer class. And I'll show you those in a second. And under this option, with the configuration of joining another group to help us get launched, we would be able to launch in 2021. When we discuss utility rates in front of council, we always show you some indicative customer classes of what might typical customers pay for water rates or trash rates or wastewater. Same thing with electricity. Under this model, scenario 4, residential customers would see a 6.9% increase. And to put that into perspective, that's an increase of $87 a month as a current Edison customer up to $93. This is for 100% renewable energy. If you look at commercial customers, and I can say, residential is the bulk majority of our overall accounts, not energy use, but in terms of the number of accounts. Small commercial, you'd see an 8.5% increase, and it hovers around 8% for all different kinds of commercial customers. The large industrial customers see a bit of a bigger increase, and this gets back to the intrinsic nature of those large industrial customers. They use a lot of energy. They're not paying as much, so the premium has a bigger percentage impact on them. They're up to 12%. We believe that the majority of the industrial customers in this case are city facilities, big users, the water and wastewater plants and airport and desal plant and things like that. But it could include other customers in the M1 zoning district, on the lower east side. We're not aware of too many agricultural accounts, but we're showing them here just because that is a rate class the customer has. And then under this scenario, this is an important point. Under this scenario, we wanted to maintain whatever income qualified rate relief there would be for care customers and lower income customers. So whatever they're paying with Edison now, we would match it. We thought that was an important point. So under CCE, I just want to talk a little bit about customer choice in the context of rate increases. And it's an important point that, CCE customers, they have a number of options. And when the city forms the CCE, we will notify customers. We're required to send out 4 notices. I can guarantee you there'll be a very robust public information campaign. But the customers have a couple of choices. One, they stay as a CCE customer. The second is they can opt down to something less than our default offering of 100%. And we'll want to keep them in our fold. And thirdly is the opt-out. And I say this because in the context of rate increases and rate tolerance, we want to give customers options so that maybe for those that don't want to go to the 100%, there will be other options for them, but we can keep them in our entity. The second option that the city has as a decision maker, or you have as decision makers, is that we will have the ability to phase in certain customers if we need to. And what we'll talk about later is this implementation plan where we will refine some of these theoretical things into a concrete action plan, but we'll be looking at customer phasing as an option as well. And then finally, public outreach is important. We want everybody, all customers, to be extremely aware that this is coming, what it means, what the city's goals are, and what their options are. So I want to turn my attention just to the risk profile related to CCE. As with any new business, the first few years are the most vulnerable. We're the most vulnerable. We looked at what the risks would be that a CCE or our new CCE would be confronting. The first, and this was more relevant about a year ago when we were really concerned about the departing load charges, but 18% of our pro forma being in the form of these departing load charges is concerning, and to the extent that that changes or that methodology changes again, that's certainly a risk. Initial customer opt-out. So when we set this CCE up and we have whatever customers opt out of the CCE and go back to Edison, that's a risk. We think we've taken a pretty conservative approach to that by using 20% instead of 10%, but it's still a risk. The third is customer interactions with Southern California Edison. Because when we form a CCE, to the extent that customers are irritated about intermittent outages or any other billing problem with the, related to what they're paying in terms of the CCE, to the extent that we take the blame for that, that's a risk to us. And so we're going to choose advisors and some vendors that really are skilled at dealing with Edison and trying to make as seamless of experience as possible. Certainly our debt obligation, until we pay off our debt, is a risk. Regulatory, there's always going to be regulatory risk. But in the early years, that's heightened just because we haven't built reserves and cash protections yet. And then finally, our energy market changes. And so we're going to be structuring energy contracts and procuring a whole lot of power on behalf of the city. And to the extent that we do that right, we're great. But there's always the risk that we either get outcompeted by Edison or that we could make a less than optimal choice. After about 5 years, then we start to see some of those risks drop off. We've satisfied our debt obligation. Customers are used to the new regime. So there's always the regulatory risk. There's always the energy market risk. And to the extent that we have to raise customer rates beyond what Edison is raising for whatever reason, for whatever might come, there's always the further opt-out risk. The difference after 5 years is that at that point we have procured power for those customers, and if we lose them, we're left with stranded energy costs without the ability to charge a departing load charge, right? So one of the things you'll hear from us today always, or multiple times, is unlike the way that we set water, wastewater, and trash rates, customers can always go back to Edison. Whereas as a water customer, they're always a water customer, right? And so we're always going to have to be cognizant of what the competition is doing. So most CCEs, obviously, and just like the city does, use cash reserves as a risk mitigation. Best practice is that CCEs will contribute 4% of their gross revenues to a reserve account. That would lead to, all things being equal, 40% reserves, a 40% reserve target after year 10. Building reserves quickly is certainly a priority for many of them because we can use reserves to mitigate our risk. But ultimately, council as the decision-making entity related to a CCE will set whatever reserve policy you would like to. In our model, speaking not from general, but now specifically to our studied model, under this scenario, we achieve policy reserves within 5 years. We achieve that 40% policy reserves within 5 years, not 10. And that's the nature of the economics of this, primarily because of the rate premium. The reserve contribution in the first 5 years averages $2.2 million, and I'm going to say that number outright so that it'll put into context some of the reserve sensitivities that we modeled. We hit our reserve target at about year 5.5, and then the important thing to keep in mind too is once we achieve our policy reserves, once we hit that 40%, that reserve contribution represents revenue that you can use then to build programs and specialized incentives and all the other things that CCE affords. So we asked the study author, Pacific Energy Advisors, to test our reserves a bit. And what are some hypothetical risks that we might encounter? So they came up with two. The first was an adverse regulatory decision. Don't know what it is, don't know what it will be, just something that could negatively affect CCEs more so than Edison. And we were always looking at risks that would be unique to the CCE. If we have risks that impact us both, an economic recession, for example, Edison will feel that, we'll feel that. We were looking for risks that are unique to the community choice energy entity. So the first would be a regulatory decision. PEA modeled a $1 million loss per year with that. The second was a hypothetical increase in a small portion of our overall energy load that's really the very short-term market, the day before, the day of, where we see the most volatility. So we took a tiny sliver of our overall energy load, about 10% of our energy load, and we increased it by 50%. The cost by 50%. And that came out to about $1.3 million a year. And so we modeled those to see what would happen. So what I want to get across here is that the way that we handle either an adverse regulatory decision or an energy market change will really depend on, we're going to have a fairly thoughtful rate setting strategy to recoup those losses and to continue to build reserves. To the extent that the hit is one time, and in our case, if it's 1.1 million or 1.3 million, that in relation to putting 2.2 million aside per year, we could handle that. To the extent that it's bigger than that or that it's prolonged, we're going to have to realize that we will have to increase customer rates more than the CPI to make up for that loss and to continue to build reserves. That vulnerability is higher in the early years, 0 to 5 years, but that's really our only revenue source. And so it's just, we've modeled conservative assumptions. We've modeled an approach that does build reserves well, but it's not risk-free, and we're going to have to be careful and really consider the opt-out potential of customers and just go into it with open eyes. Beyond the downside, of what could potentially require us to use reserves, I just want to turn it on its head really quickly. There will be some opportunities for us to build reserves. When we retire debt, for example, should you choose to then augment your reserves, you could do that. as our departing load charges drop off, as those contracts terminate and we are no longer paying those departing load charges, that will be revenue that you can decide what to do with. And finally, what's our competition doing? And so in the years where Edison, for example, raises their rates, and we modeled a 3% on average, 3% CPI for Edison. So to the extent that they raise their rates more than 3%, or more than we are raising them, then we may want to match that just to build ourselves some margin. And so we'll be looking at Edison quite closely, and you'll make decisions on where you want to set rates given all of those factors.
All right, so as Mr. Four showed on the options matrix that we saw that's an attachment in your packet, there are two city-only options. One is city-only, managing the entire process, and the other is city-only with some assistance. We're calling this a CCE, city-only CCE alternative, or it's in a hybrid JPA model. The reason we looked at this is because through our process, we certainly learned that establishing and operating a CCA requires specific expertise and significant experience. And so we recognized that that would be helpful to attain somehow. So should we move forward with a city-only CCE, staff is recommending that we work with others who've successfully done this in the past and have gleaned the experience that we would require. The important fact about this scenario is that the city would retain complete autonomy over the important parts of the CCE, which is the local control, the rate setting, the policy development, and the program development. So to explain that further, the entity that offers this currently is California Choice Energy Authority. They're a joint powers authority that's currently comprised of 5 individual city-only CCEs, and they're bringing a few more on board for 2020 launch. The JPA board is the City of Lancaster's City Council, but the JPA board has very limited purview. They only vote on the consultant contracts and the JPA's budget. So the city could then access all of those consultant contracts that they've developed and those relationships that they've developed to get our technical, legal, and administrative expertise and start us up quickly for that 2021 launch. And again, the city would retain all of that autonomy that we're really looking for. So to give you a quick idea of what CalChoice or California Choice Energy Authority, the role would be, it's really the technical side of the CCE operations. So things like power procurement, regulatory affairs, legal affairs, data management and call center management, and a really important one is Southern California Edison relationship, because that is a tricky one. The city on the right retains all of the local oversight, the rate setting, and one thing that we haven't brought up yet that I think is very important is the community outreach and marketing piece, because that is a critical touch point with our community that we retain control of in this situation.
Okay, so we reviewed all of this in greater detail with the CCE subcommittee on July 17th. Then the subcommittee voted unanimously to recommend to council that the city council pursue the formation of a new city-only CCE, that we offer 100% renewable energy to its customers as a base case, and that we work with the California Choice Energy Authority in both the initial implementation and setup of the CCE, as well as the ongoing operation and administration in the early years. So our recommendation to council to take that subcommittee recommendation to fruition will be the first, is we'd like to come back next Tuesday, firstly for your council to formally adopt or adopt a resolution to formally adopt the strategic energy plan, of which CCE is a big piece, and then direct staff to bring to council for consideration an agreement with CalChoice that would author or request that they develop an implementation plan for that new CCE entity. And if, I'll just finish up here, if council does concur with the subcommittee's recommendation, then, as I said, on the 30th, we'd come back, and then between now and November, we would be working with the California Choice Energy Authority to develop that implementation plan, to take some of those variables now and make those more concrete. We would bring that draft implementation plan back to council for your consideration and approval. And upon your approval, then, we would file that implementation plan with the California Public Utilities Commission. If we do so by December 31st of 2019, then we would be able to launch sometime after January 1st of 2021. So that's the near-term milestones. And with that, be glad to answer any questions.
All right. Thanks for closing with that timeline, Mr. Ford. That's important. Mr. Rouse?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Mr. Ford, what in the opt-in, opt-out, where's the nexus percentage-wise? Are we assuming that 90% of the customers are going to go CCE? If it drops down to 60%, I mean, we're going to have certain fixed costs when we go into a program like this. So where does that nexus hit where we're not going to make it? Or do you know, is that something you guys projected out yet?
I don't know what the break point, or Councilmember Rouse, I don't know what the break point is. I can tell you that in practice, we've looked at the opt-out rates of other community choice energy entities. You know, the early ones started with opt-out rates of 10%. We've seen that as CCE has grown, those have fallen, you know, to 4 to 6 to 7%. We looked at the opt-out rates of our neighbors to the south in Ventura County that opted into 100% default, and the average opt-out rate was?
For residential was about 8%,
Yeah.
and we modeled a 20% opt-out rate.
So I don't know what the absolute break point is. I just know that we took a conservative approach to that.
Right. And in terms of, I was just thinking about this in terms of the 2030 target, because I know Edison's, their target is 100% or 80% renewables by 2030 for their acquisition portfolio for energy, for producing electricity. And then this would be, of course, 100%. And there's also a nexus in those two things in terms of ratepayers and whatnot that I don't know if that's part of the calculus. But when we talked about the 18% of the revenue going to the buyout or to the what was the term of the PCA?
The departing load charges.
Departing load charge. Thank you. Now this assumption was that we'd have that 18% part of the revenue, but that once that was done, it wouldn't be a lower rate of rates; it'd be a building of reserves. Is that what the projection was?
And Councilmember Rouse, City Council, that's really your decision.
Okay.
So I meant to say that is that's revenue for you as the elected body to do whatever you like with it.
Okay, very good. And then just last question. In terms of who, did you talk about local control and local authority and whatnot? So I know there's services and consultants that we use, the Lancaster people, whatever the JPAs are. Do we form a local board, department, managers? What part of that is now part of the city? So what does that entail?
Sure. So the California Choice Energy Authority is a joint power authority of discrete community choice energy entities. So the city of Santa Barbara, as say an enterprise fund, for example, would form a CCE. We would then be joining the California Choice Energy Authority as a fully contained bona fide CCE.
Would we determine the portfolio, or is that performed
Yes.
done? So we'd have to have some person or persons that did that kind of thing.
Oh, absolutely. That one of the reasons why why working with CalChoice is attractive is that they've launched 5 or 6 CCEs already. They're already helping to manage and administer them, and again, those are fully contained CCEs.
And just to add on, Councilmember Rouse, in this scenario, the city council would be the board of the CCE.
Oh, well, that's comforting.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
That's
I'm just kind
good.
of curious. I mean, I'm assuming that there's a department in the wings to do that, and that's built into all of your projections as far as the cost of the program.
It likely be a new enterprise fund for the city.
Right. All right. Thank you very much.
And just to add on to that, Councilmember Rouse, that is built into the strategic energy plan, and the energy and climate program would take over that oversight.
Thank you.
Right, and you'll delineate the positions that will be created there. I think that's what we heard at the Sustainability Committee level.
Yes, and we do have a slide on that if you'd like me to go over those positions.
Mr. Rouse, did you want to look at those? Okay, We're good. Mr. Dominguez, you're next.
So, following up on the JPA question, I'm not familiar with this type of use of a JPA. Can you explain a little more why this would be the chosen structure?
Yeah, I think I'm going to start, and then I'm going to, if you'd like to hear from Ms. Boswell, who's with CalChoice, we can do that. And I'll kind of look to the subcommittee as well, but I think what we heard, what was attractive, was that the city of Santa Barbara is its own community choice energy entity. And I think to compare it to what else we could be, I'll take the Monterey Bay Community Power, for example. That's a joint power authority where the jurisdictions are members of a JPA of 20 jurisdictions, but that's one CCE. It's one CCE entity with representation and serving 20 different jurisdictions. So you have whatever representation and governance and voting you would have under that structure. Under the California Choice Energy Authority, you as the city council would make decisions about what rates you want to serve, what rates you want to charge customers, what your renewable portfolio content is, what incentive programs you want to develop eventually, whether it's EV charging or solar or whatever it might be. So you make those decisions, you set reserve policy, you set all those things. But as a CCE, a fully contained bona fide CCE as a member of CalChoice, we then get to tap into the expertise of this other agency that are experts in this, that can help us navigate through that difficult road of starting up and operating and looking for risks and looking for potholes. And we would have the experience guiding hand of seasoned professionals while we retain the essential local control elements that we heard from the subcommittee were so important.
So I don't understand why there needs to be any joint power or authority. I don't understand why we wouldn't just contract directly with CalChoice Energy Authority for their expertise.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Dominguez, if I could jump in one point about this, and this is kind of a hybrid JPA, so it's not your typical JPA that we're used to forming like with CCWA or those other water organizations. And the reason why it's a hybrid is because the city, as a CCA, which would be an enterprise fund kind of department, is its separate kind of entity, not legal entity, but separate entity, which is joined together with other separate CCAs to form, and then the other CCAs become associate members of this overarching JPA. JPA, the board of directors, is the city council for the city of Lancaster, but all they do really is provide professional services to the members, legal, rate setting, not rate setting, but legal, perform a development in terms of what your energy load is and recommendations on the rates and so forth. But the risk that's involved with rate setting and with power purchases particularly is solely kept to the city. It's not shared between members. So there's no cross liability between members, which I think is the really primary difference between this setup and your typical JPA. We're our own entity. We're responsible completely for our own funding. So all of the revenues go into what's called a lockbox, which is a bank that sets up an account. It's that lockbox is the security for the power purchase agreements, which are basically just security agreements. It's also security for CalChoice to pay our fees. And then the balance of anything that's left over rolls to the city. Nobody else can invade that lockbox of revenue funds. So I think it makes it kind of an attractive JPA because we're not sharing the liability, we're not sharing the risk, but we're getting the benefit.
It's almost like they're putting all the money in, let's just say, Bank of America. Monterey would have theirs in Wells Fargo. I mean, they're separate accounts. So I just don't understand why we would take the extra risk of having the jointness. There's no added benefit outside of having a direct contract with a consultant. Because let's be honest, when the blob hits the fan, people are going to start suing each other. And now we have extra entities within this JPA who can start suing each other. So I understand the legal setup. I just don't understand what the benefit is, Because in the joint situations, like with Monterey, those cities are all collectively deciding we all want 70% solar, 30% water, whatever they choose, and that applies to all their ratepayers. In this structure, Santa Barbara would solely choose for its. So I just don't see why we'd have the extra entanglement. So I'll just keep moving forward, holding that tension in my mind, but.
Yeah, and just my comment on that is, and your point is really well taken, because that's true. The advantage is we're hiring existing expertise.
We can do that through a direct contract. The JPA doesn't allow any
extra. We can. We definitely can.
Right.
But that's the benefit, is we are hiring established expertise. They have created 5 of these already. They're in the power purchase business. They know how to negotiate these power purchase agreements. They've done it before. It's been successful. That's the advantage.
But that's not an advantage. We can get that by directly contracting. The JPA doesn't give us any more expertise than any other system.
And you're absolutely right. We could. It just is. It would take more internal, local building of that expertise.
Well, no, we could just hire CCEA through a contract.
Right.
So
absolutely.
We can come back and explore that. Yeah. Mr. Ford, you gave us some stats for Ventura. Are they charging a premium? You've talked about our model having this premium concept. Do they have the same premium concept?
Councilmember Dominguez, City Council, yes, they do. Our rates fell very much in line with what Ventura County experienced within that 6 to 9% range.
So their rate is the 6.9% more than Edison?
It's about 6 to 9% more than Edison, depending on the customer class.
And is Ventura doing part of a CCE? They're doing part of, is it Clean Power?
Yes.
And in that situation, does Clean Power set the rate, or does Ventura set the rate?
And in that case, Clean Power sets the rates.
Okay.
As the JPA board.
What would be the cost to the general fund over the next year and a half until it gets started, or the impact?
Well, Councilmember Dominguez, the working capital, the startup costs that were assumed by the consultant was about $4 million. The assumption is that the CCE entity pays back that debt. So it would be a loan from the city, whether it's the general fund or another utility, for example. We would assume that there would be a loan, there would be some nominal amount of interest, but the CCE entity would then pay that back. So ultimately, there would be no impact on the general fund.
Okay.
We've built the debt service into the rates.
So worst case scenario, the PUC cuts off CCEs next December. We can't start it. We would just absorb the $4 million cost into the general fund.
I think that's correct, right. And just another point further down the road, the city, the general plan is ultimately, if our rates are insufficient and if there's not enough revenue in our lockbox to pay our debt to the power purchase companies, then ultimately the general plan is the responsible fund.
Right.
Yeah, and the only other thing I would add is that we're not on the hook for substantial debt until we execute power purchase agreements. So if we launch in, say, April of 2021, we wouldn't be executing those contracts until probably December or January, just prior to that. So there's a long, my point is there's a long time and several off-ramps for us to not be committed to costs and even startup costs until we get right to the point of executing large power purchase agreements.
Well, I guess to be more specific, I'm curious how much the decision we make today will cost. If we go 6 months and we keep moving down the pipeline, is that going to be a $200,000 cost to the general fund if at that point we take an off-ramp? Mm-hmm. Like, where does it really get significant? Is it pretty flat?
Yeah, good question. So what is before you today and will be before you next week is the phase one. We call it the phase one contract with CalChoice. That's roughly $60,000 to prepare the implementation plan. You would then have the option of filing that with the California Public Utilities Commission. We can file that plan. They can even approve it, and you're not obligated to go any further than that. The next phase at the turn of the new year would be a phase two plan with CalChoice. That would be the implementation activity That's where we take the plan and start to actually implement it. That's roughly $160,000. Even then, right up to the point that we execute power purchase agreements with energy providers, you are not under any obligation other than that. So at that point, you're at, what is that, $220,000, and you still have an off-ramp. That's your sunk cost.
And at what point do we join the JPA? In phase 1 or phase 2?
Phase 2, that would be in about February of 2020.
Okay. What happens to the model if there's a recession?
That's a good question. We would, well, I mean, that would likely, to the extent that it increases bad debt, we would have to account for that. Depending on when that recession occurred and what our reserve balances were, we'd have to be looking at that. If there were a general recession, that would impact the CCEs and Edison most likely fairly equally. And so to the extent that Edison raises its rates to play catch up, we would hope to raise our rates to play catch up too. So again, it's the risks that impact the CCE and the IOU or the Southern California Edison equally, I'm less concerned about. It's the risks that impact the CCE uniquely are the ones that we're really keeping our eye on.
And with regard to SCE, do we know what their contract outlook is for the future? Is that public information?
Yeah, generally.
Because I'm guessing their contracts are getting cheaper as more alternative energy comes online at a cheaper rate, and they're trying to...
Councilmember Dominguez, Mayor Murillo, the Edison's power portfolio is increasingly renewable, mostly because they have so many departing load entities. So they've procured renewable power well into the future, and as people, for example, Clean Power Alliance, leave, their bulk of the renewable portfolio grows. So that's why they're aiming for an 80% renewable portfolio by 2030. That being said, they have the same resource adequacy requirements that a community choice energy entity would have, and so they have to procure a certain amount of long-term contracts, a certain amount of mid-term contracts, and some, obviously, spot market contracts. So I think it would be very similar for the CCE and Southern California Edison. One thing that is important to note is that renewable power is actually not getting cheaper because so many more people are after it. And so we're having to be very thoughtful, as Mr. Four said, about how we go after those contracts.
So, and just to be clear, so the cost is getting lower, but the price isn't getting lower because the demand's going up.
Precisely.
So that price could actually drop down to cost. I mean, assuming you have rational players, but that's a risk we have to acknowledge because we can't forecast the future.
And Councilmember Dominguez, Mayor Murillo, that is certainly true. And I think one of the byproducts of that is that Southern California Edison is not going to enter into any additional renewable contracts in the near term because they've sort of met their out-term requirement. So we have a real opportunity to help push forward the additional development of renewables.
And the number in our model here, the $87, what does that represent? This is on slide 26.
Mm-hmm. I believe that's the quote-unquote typical residential bill. For a typical residential account, about $87 a month, and applying our 6.9% increase takes it up to $93.
So like in my household, our bill on average is less than $50. So ours wouldn't go up to 93, would it?
It would not.
This would be kind of a scaled.
Go up $4 or something.
So it would go up to 6.9%?
Absolutely.
So, okay. It's about $350, okay. And the zero interest rate that you're modeling, what is a more likely scenario? Are we looking at 3 or 4%?
In speaking to the finance director, Robert Samario, he assumed something like a 3%. That would be, roughly, say, interest of maybe $120,000 a year over 5 years. That would add about 0.4% to the customer rates. It's not substantial. It's something we would account for in the implementation plan, and then we'd be looking for savings elsewhere to balance that out.
And regarding the premium, could we, if we end up not moving forward with this, would it be somewhat equivalent to pass a utility tax on Edison and use that to pay for the local programs or to provide the incentives that we're envisioning?
Mayor Murillo, Councilmember Dominguez, it is fairly unlikely that we would want to increase the utility users tax by that amount to create the same amount of revenue that we would generate through the community choice energy. So that would be, again, a council decision, but it would be substantial.
And why are those rates not equivalent, or could you explain a little more?
I believe it's how that UUT is assessed. Right now it's quite a small percentage of the bill, so the increase would be fairly large to each individual customer, as opposed to smoothed out through all of these different rate classes.
So, and that wouldn't be what happens with the 6.9% premium from slide 26?
I don't believe so. And also, the additional challenge with reassessing a UUT is, I believe, CPUC approval is necessary, and that is a more challenging endeavor than forming a CCE.
And if we did go that route and we made it less, what would be the first projects we would fund? Or if we end up with this program, what would be some of the first projects that we're funding?
Mayor Murillo, Councilmember Dominguez, the world's our oyster. We have a number of projects in the pipeline. We have a number of assets that we would love to develop. For example, the city has a number of reservoirs that provide ample roof space that we could develop significant solar assets at, but currently there's no load at those sites. So we are not currently able to develop them to their full potential through the utility. Community choice energy would allow us to really maximize those sites and reinvest that revenue into the community.
Great. So those are the questions I have for now. Thank you.
And if I could just add one thing, I was just whispered in my ear that the increase in the UUT would require voter approval.
Oh, there you go.
Councilmember Snedden.
Just quickly, thank you. I think it's such an exciting day that we really set an aggressive goal and you met the challenge, and we'll be able to do it sooner than we thought, and I think that's really exciting. Councilmember Dominguez asked some of my questions towards the end there about what types of innovative programs. I think that's one of the more exciting elements of this, but also the local control and being able to keep that funding local, and resilience. And if you could just give a little bit more detail on the resilience component of that, and we've had questions about desal, or what does that do with, you mentioned that our largest industrial use is probably municipal uses, and just a little more detail on that benefit also.
Mayor Murillo, Councilmember, and that is a fantastic question. And I appreciate that you asked it, because often the building of renewable assets is conflated with automatic resiliency. And it's important to point out that the CCE would help us build renewable assets, but it might also help us with the infrastructure development required to create resiliency. And that would mean really working with the transmission system to make sure that we develop microgrids and other ways to keep the power on in an outage. So that would be one of council's options, would be at some point to develop a microgrid program that would help fund whether small or medium scale microgrids. We could also look at developing larger utility assets that are on this side of the mountain range that separates us from a lot of Southern California Edison's assets, and that would be beneficial. But you're absolutely right, just building a solar array does not necessarily mean we're resilient. We would also have to look at the transmission piece, and this would give us a funding source to potentially do that with.
Excellent, thank you.
You good? Mr. Friedman.
Great. If you could pull up slide 23 for just a moment. Do you have the full slide that has the additional? There you go. Perfect. To follow up on Councilmember Dominguez's questioning about going alone versus maybe Clean Power Alliance or Monterey Bay, when we decided to move forward to do the additional studies on whether or not to do that, I know there was some discussion about a year ago on whether to go into Clean Power Alliance, but majority of the council decided to do this initial study, including a city only. And this matrix kind of is a good job of summing up a lot of the issues. And one of the questions I had is, in the committee meeting, we discussed Monterey Bay in particular, but there was an issue with PG&E, and rate differences. If you could explain that issue and the risk associated with that.
Sure, Councilmember Friedman, Mayor Murillo. You know, Monterey Bay Community Power has been courting the local jurisdictions. You know, what you can see on this chart is what they have going for them. They have launched. They seem to be doing a good job, and they have built substantial reserves. Substantial reserves. The couple of the things that hampered our decision in terms of bringing them forward as a recommendation, first was timing, in that based upon their timeline to join that JPA, we had until August 13th to really understand what we were getting into. To join a JPA and all of the things associated with that, and joining a entity that could then issue debt on our behalf and things like that, we just didn't feel like we had the time to really get into that. The second was that they have never operated in Edison territory. They're very, very expert and intimately aware of PG&E, but not in Edison. Edison has a completely different billing system. Edison not only has a completely different billing system, but they have recently implemented a whole new billing system. So even those who understood the old one don't necessarily understand the new one. We thought that was a big risk. It was a big risk in terms of opt-out, because again, if our customers have a bad experience because of an Edison hiccup, we were afraid that we, the CCE, would be blamed for that, and we might lose a customer after we've contracted energy on their behalf. That was a problem. The third one was Monterey Bay Community Power is offering attractive rates. They were offering attractive rates to Edison territory customers. The unknown, and again, this was a timing issue, we were unclear and were therefore hesitant to move forward on that assumption because their board had not affirmatively agreed to essentially subsidize Edison customers with the excess rate revenue that the PG&E territory affords. PG&E rates are higher than Edison's. That's the reason why Monterey Bay Community Power is so flush with reserves. And to the extent that they were going to make our rates more attractive, that would by definition require that some of their PG&E customers subsidize our Edison rates. The staff was committed to that. The board had not been approached in that regard, and therefore we were hesitant to move forward on that unproven assumption.
Thank you. One other question. On this chart here under local control, for the Clean Power Alliance, it says 1 of 40, for the Monterey Bay, 1 of 17. Can you explain what those numbers mean, and then what the future is looking like in particular for Clean Power Alliance?
Sure. So these are projected membership, but 1 of 40, this gets to the governance structure. And so under the Clean Power Alliance and our assumption was that, you know, the city and the county and others join that, but we would end up being 1 of 40 seats on the board. And so, you know, that we just offered that to the subcommittee in terms of consideration of whether that would be acceptable. Same thing with Monterey Bay. We would be 1 of 17. They have a different governance structure in terms of some smaller cities share. We would have our own seat on the Monterey Bay board. We just offered it to the subcommittee of whether 1 of 17 or 1 of 40 was attractive.
And in the for the Clean Power Alliance, just to clarify from my understanding from the subcommittee is that they're looking to actually expand further, and it could go up to 1 of, I think you said, well, what was the number that we said? Was it 1 of 80 or something? Or
Mayor Murillo, Councilmember Friedman, there are 88 jurisdictions within LA County, and they are open to accepting them all within the fold. Additionally, they have Ventura County participants, and then we would be obviously bringing some Santa Barbara County participation.
And then one final question, sorry, is in terms of local programming, what is the ability to create our local programming and reinvest our dollars here? In particular, how would that affect how we address the desal issue?
Mayor Murillo, Councilmember Friedman, can you please clarify which scenario you're referring to?
I mean, if we were to go either with Clean Power Alliance or Monterey Bay, Can you speak to the reduction, or if there is a reduction in our ability to do local programming, and if there would be any impacts to how we are able to address the design?
We were able to do some due diligence with both of these entities. We had several phone calls with the leadership of Clean Power Alliance and Monterey Bay Community Power and did ask those specific questions. How would our local needs be addressed, whether through programming or projects? With Clean Power Alliance, it is a JPA decision what type of programs you're developing, and so we would have a 1 in 40 or 88 or whatever number they end up stopping at voice in that development. They did mention that they have several subcommittees, and the more involved a council member, whomever is appointed as liaison, is on those subcommittees, the more your local needs are addressed, but that requires significant time commitment and driving to Los Angeles frequently. So to try and answer your question, it would require significant staff and council effort and would still be primarily a 1 in 40 plus voice. We did ask them in terms of projects, what could be done to develop projects locally, and they said they would give some points for meeting member needs, certainly in terms of transmission risks, but that is one of 7 criteria they evaluate project development, and so fairly nominal. With Monterey Bay Community Power, we asked the same thing. They actually do have a few programs currently developed, and we would be able to access those at whichever point they expand down into our direction. But they weren't very aligned with what we were specifically looking for, and that is our resiliency needs. They were pretty blatant about saying that their project development is mostly an economic decision. So if it doesn't make financial sense, or if it's not very nominally increased in terms of cost, they would not consider building in our area. And so that was something that was concerning to us in terms of our reliability and resiliency needs.
Okay. If there are no other questions, we'll go to public comment. Lindsay Baker, you'll be first. Michael Chiakos, Phil Walker, Vijaya Jamal Amadaka, and Bonnie Raisin. Are you coming together?
Well,
okay.
I'm ceding my time to Vijaya. And she's our new president of the League of Women Voters.
Okay. You have 5 minutes then if she's giving you time.
Well, we don't need that much time, actually. We just, we've sent a letter already, and we'd like to commend staff for doing such a great job. Actually, we have been following the CCE issue quite closely. We've been studying it, and we've been studying it for many years now, actually. And we have reviewed the staff report, and we urge you to adopt the recommendations. We understand the financial problems associated with the 100% alternative energy as the default level, but we also note that there are many more advantages, and there are mitigations. So we urge you to adopt this.
Ms. Jamal Amadaka, can I congratulate you? The League of Women Voters put on an educational workshop. Was that 2 years ago now? One of your Wednesday informational workshops on community choice energy. Well attended, you had great speakers, and everyone was really excited by the prospect of it. So I just wanted to thank you for doing your part in public education.
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
You're welcome.
We hope to continue to do that.
Yes, ma'am. Mr. Chiakos.
Good afternoon. My name is Michael Chiakos. I'm the Director of Energy and Climate Programs at Community Environmental Council. And I'm very happy to be here today. We are supportive of the city starting their own community choice program, using it to achieve the 100% renewable energy goal, passing the strategic energy plan, and we really applaud the city for taking these leadership steps to address the climate crisis. Back in 2007, we released our blueprint for a new energy direction, which was one of the first climate action planning documents in the United States. And we saw back then community choice as the closest thing to a silver bullet in being able to greatly reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, as well as create programming to help our residents and businesses to adopt clean energy technologies. 4 years ago, we felt so strongly that we were participants as funders in the original feasibility study, and we're very excited that our region is now moving forward with community choice. As you probably have heard, the County of Santa Barbara and City of Goleta are moving forward with Monterey Bay. Carpinteria likely will do so next month. Guadalupe is looking at it at their City Council meeting this evening. And we are very excited that our region as a whole is moving forward. We've been following this process, attending all the subcommittee meetings. Staff can attest we've been asking all the tough questions, and especially with our neighbors moving forward with Monterey Bay Community Power, we wanted to make sure that we're not splitting our community, that we're all making the right choices. And while we realize that Monterey, our neighbors will probably have programming sooner than us, as a city resident myself and as city residents, we may have to wait a little longer, but ultimately we'll have the local control, the local programming that we really need. And here in Santa Barbara, we've always done things a little bit our own way. So we are very supportive of the city of Santa Barbara moving forward, and we are excited about the possibility for all the programming with electric vehicles, solar energy, microgrids, all the things that are the potentials. So thank you so much.
Mr. Dominguez has a question for you.
Yeah, in its essence, why did Goleta decide to go in that direction?
Well, I think Goleta would have been interested in a JPA option of just the South Coast. When Santa Barbara said we're going to form our own and a JPA is going to slow us down, and then the county moved to go forward with Monterey Bay, then Goleta said, okay, really our only option now would be to move forward with Monterey Bay or perhaps also do our own city-run CCE. They don't have as large of a staff and as much expertise as the city of Santa Barbara, and I think they felt it's easier just to join the county and move forward with Monterey Bay, and we supported them in that action. We think that's the right choice for them and also the county, which has a little bit of a different composition and constituency than Santa Barbara.
So I'd understand why it would be a good choice for them and not for us. Is there some difference in our circumstances?
Well, I think that the city of Santa Barbara has much more desire for local control, as well as perhaps has the constituents that are willing to pay a little bit extra for the 100% renewable energy product. And I think also it was mostly just that it's an easier path to go forward and less risk to go forward with Monterey Bay. But you lose some things such as the local control there. And ultimately, I think the city of Goleta felt that it was just easier to join with Monterey Bay.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Mr. Walker, and thanks to Community Environmental Council for everything you do, if I'm thanking the league. So you get thanks too. Mr. Walker, and then Bonnie Raisin, our final speaker.
Good afternoon, Madam Mayor, members of the City Council. Once again, you got to keep the lights on. I remember Pete Wilson during he was about ready, not termed out, but his term was near expiring, and he was running for governor, or gonna run. Then you had the Enron fiasco take place, and it put the kibosh on his run for governor, essentially. So you got to do this right, because politically it can be a hammer coming down on you. And I had one instance at El Estero, and I did work there for 35 years, and one evening I had a two-man crew, and all of a sudden, right at end of shift time, I was heading for the showers, and everything went black. And here comes the security staffer, security guard, and he said, "What happened? What happened?" I could hear the exhaust and signifying that the 2-megawatt emergency genset at El Estero was cranking over. And I said, "Don't worry, at least we're on emergency power." So the whole energy supply and power system is a big, big concern. And I think to the general ratepayers here in the city of Santa Barbara, you need to come up, with a simple, executive summary type thing, 6 pages maybe, that explains this whole thing, because I'm confused on it. So thank you very much.
All right, thanks. Ms. Raisin?
Thank you very much. I'm Bonnie Raisin, and I will withhold total judgment until I hear the rest of this presentation next week. But on the face of it, you know, I am for the free enterprise system, and I am also very much in favor of city control. However, I don't like the sound of the rate increase, which is very vague. Perhaps it can be refined next week from the department, but if it will increase the number of employees in the Public Works Department or whatever, I am totally against that. We have more employees for a city our size than any other city in California. I love our employees. Don't misunderstand me. Well, I don't love them, but I respect them. But I don't want any more positions added, as well as a possible rate increase, because that is too indefinite right now, and I definitely would not support any plan that increased the number of employees in the department or raised our rates for the sake of the program. So, and I will be speaking next week about this when I have more information and have done more research. Thank you.
Okay, that closes public comment. Mr. Ford, can you go back to the recommendation page? You showed us a nice timeline. So this is, we're at this point then. We did everything we needed to for today. Mr. Friedman, go ahead. You're first.
So the first thing I like to say is I'm reminded of those old Subway sandwich commercials, $5 footlong, and how good a deal it was. And then we come here and it's $6 a month to go 100% renewable, and I think that's a great deal. So you know where I'm at on this. I'd like to first thank our staff for all the work that you've done over a number of years. It's tremendous, especially with the subcommittee. You did a lot of research on this, and it was thoroughly vetted and gave us a lot of different options and a lot to consider. So I really appreciate the information that you provided to us, as well as League of Women Voters and Community Environmental Council. I know Mr. Chiacos, you've been working on this for many years now as well. I remember conversations going all the way back to 2006 when we first started this and the recession came. So it's been over well over 10 years in the making to try to make this happen, and today feels like the day we are going to make it happen. And I'd also just like to say that in terms of why I'm supporting this, one is the 100% renewable. It's a major part of our strategic energy plan, and it was a goal set by the previous council to get there by 2030. And the 100% renewable is one of the single most important measures we can take to achieve that goal. The other is the local control and the ability to have our own local programming and reinvestment. It's not just about the programs, but it's also about the jobs that we will be creating in our community and the reinvestment that we have here. So there are a lot of very important jobs here, and it will bring us forward. And the other reason is that we keep our Santa Barbara name by us going on our own here. While I do appreciate Monterey Bay and what they were offering in Clean Power Alliance, the chance for our community to have the Santa Barbara name out there as a leader and continuing to have that and going into the future, to have local programming and perhaps innovations that are 5 or 10 years down the road that we can really invest in and make those decisions for ourselves. It allows us to continue our legacy on here. So when people look at, we have a Santa Barbara clean energy and community choice energy, and our name is there, it's important for us. So with that, generally we've referred to making motions, but on this one I have a hunch that we have support on it, so I will move the staff recommendation.
Thank you. With a second from Ms. Sneddon, who's also on the subcommittee, and go ahead. Your turn.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just want to echo Councilmember Friedman's remarks and just how remarkable of a job you have done in meeting all of our requests. And when we requested more information and what the impacts would be to our neighbors and more information each time, you came back so quickly and with such clear information that made the choice really clear while leaving it to us, the choice to make. And I really want to commend you especially for that. I don't think it's too melodramatic to say that we're in an existential crisis with climate change. And I think what this does is a win-win, kind of addressing not just how our resilience has really been shaken. I mean, we've seen that not just with fires and debris flows, but just the I don't know how much we're not able to rely on our electrical system as much as we would like to. And this brings that resilience back to us while fighting the underlying causes of climate change. So in all ways with climate change, this is really such an exciting day for us. And then the possibility of having that revenue be local and to be innovative in what we can do for the community and the incentive programs and the innovative programs, which you've already shown to be so creative in those ways. And I'm looking forward to seeing what the city can do that we don't even know yet to bring forward. And I'm excited about being the entity that can make those decisions about what sounds like a good idea for our residents or not. And Ms. Raisin, just to address you, I think having local jobs and having that revenue stay locally as opposed to going to Monterey Bay or to somewhere else is, even if it does create more staffing, which I think would be a bonus because it would be paid for with the revenue. I think that's really exciting too, that all of that revenue could be staying local. So just again, I'm very excited about this, and also with desal, which we hear a lot about the energy drain of desal and that we're using that water and how to offset that, and this really gives us that mechanism to be able to do that in the future. So I'm very excited to be part of voting for this, and we'll be supporting, and thank you.
Thanks. Mr. Rouse.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Well, out of respect for the fabulous work of staff, and I do want to see how this little story turns out, I'm going to be supporting the recommendation. But I do want to bear a few things in mind. When we talk about energy, we're talking specifically about electricity, and we do still use other things energy-wise to power our local fleets, to power our fire trucks, to power Marburg is on natural gas. There are other things that are not strictly electrical. If you look out in the parking lot, you're going to see a few gas-powered vehicles driven by some of your local elected officials as well. So there's still not going to be 100% energy that's going to be quote-unquote renewable. And my biggest thing about energy in this town is local dependability. That's the thing most people are concerned about besides rates, is do the lights go out? Because we still have to transfer wherever this energy is produced, because we cannot produce all this stuff locally. We can produce relatively a small portion locally. It still has to be transferred to large lines. And that's a very important thing to realize. And as much as we like to talk about Edison or PG&E, those people right next to the firefighters during the disasters doing their stuff up in the wildlands as well. So I want to keep all that in mind as we go forward. And go forward we will, because it's obviously what's going to go on up here. But one of my biggest compliments for staff, besides their expertise, is not taking or not putting credits in as part of the portfolio. In other words, we don't want to just do this symbolically. We don't want to buy energy credits from Lancaster or Palmdale. We want to actually have the renewable energy. So I want to see how this plays out. I am the skeptical one up here about this. I don't want to just willy-nilly raise customer rates or decrease dependability. And there are exit fees coming from SCE, which are, I think, relatively predictable. But it isn't going to be for free, and it is going to hurt for a while. So I really want to see this entire thing fleshed out as we go forward. And as Mr. Forrest said, there are off-ramps if we so decide. But I want to make sure we do the right thing for our people in the community out there, to not just do things to make sure we get the good housekeeping seal of approval, but we actually do the right thing for everybody's daily lives. Thanks.
Thanks. Mr. Dominguez.
So is there a way potentially to pursue one of the other CCEs simultaneously as a backup plan? Because I think everyone seems to agree that we'd like to be online in 2021. But if something does happen at the regulatory scheme with the Utility Commission and we can't pursue this, will we then not have enough time to get on one of the other on-ramps?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Dominguez, for 2021, it would be difficult. The Clean Power Alliance has told us that they are not accepting new jurisdictions in 2021. The earliest they would bring somebody on would be 2022. And in that case, they are welcoming jurisdictions that do opt up to 100% default, so we would qualify for that. But the earliest with CPA would be 2022. With Monterey Bay, we would not make 2021 because you would have to adopt, or you'd have to introduce the ordinance by August 13th, and it's just a really fast timeline. And so that's why even with the subcommittee, we were not hopeful that we could do the level of due diligence necessary to make a recommendation to go that way. So I think if things don't work out on our current track and we do have those off ramps, there would be other options open, but they would just be in a later year.
I think I'd almost be more distraught at losing to the county in Goleta than losing the $4 million if we get locked out of this. So that was my only question. So moving on to my comments, so I want to thank staff for putting this together, and I want to thank my other council members who are serving on the committee for bringing this, and then the League of Women Voters. Thank you for being here and having been studying this for years, and also Michael Chacos and your organization has had several workshops as well, and I've sat in on those, so it's been a great experience. And I think my main reason for moving forward, aside from all the environmental benefits, is particularly in this configuration, is what Councilmember Friedman said. We're Santa Barbara. This is where Earth Day started. We have to be leaders in the state. Leaders in this state are leaders in the country, which we're leading the world. And I think we've fallen behind in promoting the environmental values that I think everyone in Santa Barbara, most people in Santa Barbara, adhere to. So this is a chance to hopefully catch up, possibly find some innovation along the way that other cities will then follow. But there are many red flags, one of which is if we embark upon this path alone, are we abandoning other cities, other communities that won't end up in a CCE? There's not a lot we can do about that, but I do worry that why aren't we just pushing along a path that forces SCE and PG&E to go for 100% for the entire state? Why aren't we pushing for a path where every city gets local projects and incentives? And I know that's a much bigger moonshot. Already pursuing this is a moonshot, but this might be a Mars shot to try to get the entire state. Hopefully, if we do it and Clean Power and Monterey and Lancaster start putting pressure on Sacramento, maybe we will ratchet it up once it becomes part of the culture in our state. So I'm hoping that happens. So with that, I'm happy to support this phase one, but just keeping an eye on all the moving parts, and hopefully everything slides into place for phase two as well. Thank you.
Okay, I'll be voting for the motion as well. The Community Choice Energy program is integral to the Climate Change Action Plan, and we know that. Thank you, Councilmember Snedden, for reminding us that our city needs to act to reduce emissions. I'm really excited about local control. We talked about locally generated energy projects and programs, and we will be successful. And then I think there's an opportunity, if that happens, we could join another group. They'll want us. So this is a good deal. Thank you so much. We've been working on it for a long time, haven't we? Also, Community Environmental Council, thank you. Good. This is really an important vote today. So we might have unanimity. Would you reread the motion, please? And it was Friedman, Snedden.
Mayor and council members, it was a motion by Mayor Pro Tem Friedman, seconded by Councilmember Snedden, to approve the staff recommendation.
Very good. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay. So for those of you waiting for number 18, the ZIR issue, we still have number 17 to do, which is our mobile home park conversion regulations update. Does anyone need a break, or should we power through? Okay. Okay. So would you read item 17 for us, Madam Clerk?
Certainly, Madam Mayor. Item 17, Mobile Home Park Conversion Regulations Update. Proposed amendments to Santa Barbara Municipal Code Section 30.185.290 and related Title 27 subdivision provisions. Recommendation of the Council: A, introduce and subsequently adopt by reading of title only an ordinance of the Council of the City of Santa Barbara amending Section 30.185.290 of the Santa Barbara Municipal Code pertaining to mobile home and permanent recreational vehicle park conversion regulations. B, introduce and subsequently adopt by reading of title only an ordinance of the Council of the City of Santa Barbara amending the Santa Barbara Municipal Code by adding Chapter 27.50 pertaining to subdivision conversion of mobile home and permanent recreation vehicle parks to resident ownership. C, introduce and subsequently adopt by reading of title only an ordinance of the Council of the City of Santa Barbara amending Section 27.03.010 of the Santa Barbara Municipal Code to designate the Chief of Building and Zoning as the advisory agency for subdivisions involving the conversion of mobile home and permanent recreation vehicle parks to another use or to resident ownership. And D, introduce and subsequently adopt by reading of title only an ordinance of the Council of the City of Santa Barbara amending Section 27.07.030 of the Santa Barbara Municipal Code to establish subdivision procedures for conversions of mobile home and permanent recreational vehicle parks.
Thanks. Y, Señor Traductor, would you make your statement, please?
Good afternoon, Madam Mayor. Good afternoon, members of the Council. My name is Carlos Cerecedo. I'm a court-certified interpreter translator, Judicial Council Certification 300249. I have an affidavit on file with the Superior Court about the accuracy of my interpretation and translation. I'm going to make a bilingual announcement.
Please.
This announcement will be done both in English and Spanish. These proceedings will be interpreted simultaneously via Channel 18 in the television channel of the city.
If you would speak into the microphone, better, yeah.
Oh, I thought my voice was much louder. It looks like it's getting weaker. Thanks. These proceedings will be interpreted simultaneously via Channel 18 of the television channel of the city. And if you wish to hear the proceedings in Spanish, there are some earphones in the back. You can put them on, and simultaneously you will be able to hear them in Spanish. And if you choose that you want to express yourself in Spanish to the council, when you come up, I'll be interpreting for you Spanish to English. Para aquellos que prefieren en español, pueden escuchar toda la interpretación de estos procedimientos en el canal 18, pero aquí tengo unos audífonos para que lo escuchen simultáneamente, y si prefieren hablar en español, pueden pasar aquí y yo haré la interpretación para los miembros del Consejo. Thank you, gracias.
Okay, thanks a lot. So, Mr. Kalan, if you're ready.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of the council. I am taking the liberty of sitting here at the staff table so that I can move around through the PowerPoint conveniently. This is coming to the council after 3 years of work to update the city's mobile home conversion regulations. The story really goes back 35 years, though, and I'm going to try and summarize that in a few slides. So mobile homes are unique. They are mobile in name only. If you ask most people associated with either living in a mobile home or owning a park. And secondly, they are simply rarely moved in fact. So the language is quoted in that slide from a court decision we'll talk about in a second. These are the parks that were open and operating when we undertook this process. I believe this is still correct, but I'm sure we'll hear from the public if it's not. Now, in the winter of 2016, there was quite a bit of concern about changes happening specifically at Flamingo, and two of the serious concerns raised about mobile home parks that are not unique to Santa Barbara but are nonetheless critical is the displacement of people who live in this vital form of affordable housing. So the council directed us to go ahead and update, and you gave us a standard to shoot for, and that was the County of Santa Barbara's similar laws. So I have prefaced this presentation repeatedly with the caveat that this is a very complex area of the law, and the integration of mobile home ownership with Santa Barbara's rent control which is not on the table today, is part of what complicates this. I always preface discussing rent control or other economic regulation that economic regulation, including this law, which will provide for payments to mobile home park residents if they are forced to move, is a form of economic regulation that requires some deliberation and care. It's highly litigious, and with any luck, we can avoid that by being careful. So the story begins in 1978 when the California Mobile Home Residency Law was created. And what it did was start a trend of providing enhanced rights to residents of mobile home parks, in part in recognition of the difficulty of moving the homes. By 1984, Santa Barbara had enacted permanent mobile home and recreational vehicle rent control. And a few months later, Williams and Jean Hall sued the city in a very famous case, claiming that the city's ordinance had taken their property. The city won at the trial court, but lost in the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. The court concluded that by freezing rent, particularly during the vacancy between tenants, the city had effectively shifted one stick from the bundle of property rights from the landowner, the park owner, to the park residents, the coach owner. And the court found that that was a taking of property. That was 1986. By 1988, the U.S. Supreme Court denied Santa Barbara certiorari, so they did not review the case. In 89, the lower court issued a memo saying that Santa Barbara's vacancy control was basically going to lead it to lose the case. So within a couple of months, the city had amended its rent control to create what's called vacancy decontrol. Now, you're going to hear that today, probably from the public. What does that mean? Vacancy decontrol means that when the home owner who is renting a space from the park owner leaves, the restricted rent under your rent control ordinance can rise to market. And so in the process of a person leaving, the park owner can reset the economic balance, at least as far as the Ninth Circuit was concerned. The problem with doing that is that vacancy decontrol, of course, gives a park owner then incentive to cause tenants to leave in order to be able to increase rent. Just a footnote, the Hall case was abrogated, rejected by the U.S. Supreme Court a few years later. So we're no longer in a situation where vacancy decontrol is automatically a taking of property. It can be in some cases, but it's not automatically. Okay, update rationale, I already mentioned it. We have very old regulations going back to the 1980s, and for a long time, what the city has required is Planning Commission discretionary review and relocation assistance benefits. We're today talking about updating the relocation assistance benefits along with the review process for these conversions. Legal basis for the update is outlined in your housing element. The housing element recognized what looks like a fairly substantial loss of mobile home park and permanent recreational vehicle units over the 15-year span on the slide. And of course, our 1984 ordinance has missed a few generations of state law changes. So I retained an outside law firm that specializes in mobile home issues. They completed their review of the ordinance and concluded that the basic policies that the council had to protect tenants with rent control and relocation assistance were all capable of being made valid and defensible, but there was substantial updating that needed to be done. Now, if you'll bear with me, I am going to skip a number of slides to speed things up. Let's talk about the 4 ordinances here. Okay, the first is addressing the inland-only portion of your municipal code. And what's happened over the years is that state law in the Subdivision Map Act has begun to get involved with the conversion of mobile home parks to resident ownership. And the broad theme to think about is this: conversion to resident ownership is a good thing if it's for real, if it's being driven by the residents who want to take ownership of the park, so the case law would tell you, and they call that a bona fide conversion. The other side of that is a sham conversion, or not a bona fide conversion, where the reason it's being converted is to evade rent control. So, if you will, without projecting any bad motive to park owners, just understand that these laws are meant to prevent misuse of that power that a park owner may have. And the way the state law construct works, the ordinance requires a report on the impact of the closure be prepared and circulated with the residents. And that report identifies things like moving expenses, availability of spaces elsewhere. It looks at the very real nitty-gritty of where am I going to live if this park is converted. The second thing we need to do, again, addresses subdivisions, and the almost exclusive purpose of Chapter 2750 is to implement Subdivision Map Act law that's come since 1984 that regulates conversions. And again, the purpose is, as I said, to prevent sham conversions designed to avoid rent control. Number 3 raised some questions with the Planning Commission, and let me explain it to the City Council. This is a change so that the Planning Commission will no longer be the first-line decision maker. When you are, the council will recall recently dealing with a claim from a property owner that certain zoning in the Ocean commercial area impacted their business in a way that made it impossible for them to break even. The data that was presented to the City Council in that case was very complicated economic information. What we're proposing to do is shift the hearing officer in the first instance from being the Planning Commission to being the Chief of Building and Zoning, which when you trace that through the code amounts to the Community Development Director or his or her designee. Why do we do that? In all likelihood, should a park closure be proposed, the city would retain an independent expert hearing officer who could prepare a detailed financial report and essentially digest that complicated information for the Planning Commission, public, and City Council. So this is not meant to take power away from the Planning Commission or City Council. It's meant to create a structure where you'll get a much more detailed analysis of the data than you would if it were simply planning staff sending a report to the Planning Commission. Fourth, the last bit of law is really just a simple cross-reference to add a requirement for preparation of the resident impact report in a cross-reference in the code. Okay, let's talk about the issues now that we've seen the 4. And by issues, I mean the places where there are some policy choices. This slide shows the existing city law versus the county relocation duty. And these words are not terribly helpful. When you parse them out carefully, you'll find that the county is actually ordinance was actually somewhat more specific than where we were. So let's look at the relocation issue here. Relocation costs hinge on distance in two ways. Number one, relocation expenses are directly related to the distance a coach might have to be moved because it costs more to move it further. Number two, in this construct where rents at the relocated park are subsidized, distance also makes a difference in affordability. When the ordinance committee heard this, the committee was presented with data from staff that justified picking a range of anywhere from 25 to 50 miles. We suggested using 35 miles because that would include substantial portions of Oxnard and Ventura, and from a legal standpoint might be a bit safer in that it would encompass, if I recall correctly, and we'll get to the slide, something like 6,000 mobile homes, and that's a large market within which a move could be investigated. The Planning Commission heard testimony that the Ordinance Committee did not, and that testimony said that within 25 miles, because of restrictions on the age of the coach, it is extraordinarily difficult to move, and therefore the public, the coach owners, were concerned with the effect on the in-place value of their coach. Let's talk that through. The ordinance says that if the coach can't be moved, the owner needs to pay the in-place appraised value of that coach. So if it's more difficult to move a coach because the geographical area is smaller, that's likely to affect the in-place value. Let's look at the slides and then we'll continue explaining this concept. So here's the radius map that I mentioned. I hope everyone can see it, but the concentric circles are from Santa Barbara out 25, 30, 40, and 50 miles. And as you can see, the 35-mile radius extends into Oxnard and includes much of Ventura. The Planning Commission selected 25. That was within the range of acceptable figures from our standpoint, so we don't have any objection, but that's an issue for the council. I mentioned this. Now let's look at the existing city law on the left side. The moving expenses are payable under the existing city law are less than a third of what the county caps it at. So the city caps moving expenses at the greater of 1.5 times monthly rent or $2,000, where the county has it at 3 months or $7,000. What we're proposing here is that if the home can be relocated, then the owner would be paid all costs, and you pick the number, 35 or 25, in addition to 12 months of rent as a lump sum differential to soften the burden of that forced change. If it can't be relocated, the owner has to buy and pay in-place value. If it's not a mobile home, and many of the parks have structures that have been added, there is still protection provided for permanent residents. It is spelled out in the slide. It's substantially higher than what's in the code now, and it is comparable or equivalent to what the county has. Finally, even renters are protected under the proposed ordinance, meaning non-coach owners or non-structure owners, and they have a rental subsidy that you can see on the slide. Okay, another difference is in relocation assistance plan preparation. Our existing ordinance doesn't specify any technical skill required. The revised ordinance follows the county model and allows us to make sure that it's a very careful selected specialist who can do that work. I mentioned the subdivision laws. I mentioned technical decision making. I mentioned the tenant impact report. That's all I have. If there are questions, I can take them. I recognize that this is very abbreviated, and I think the broad theme can be trusted here subject to public comment, and that is we've updated to walk, look, and talk in the same manner as the County of Santa Barbara. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And we know that the ordinance committee looked at this 2 or 3 times. Okay. Mr. Dominguez, you're first, followed by Mr. Friedman.
And did the county land on 35 miles or 25?
25, if I recall.
Okay. So the 35 you have here in the red, that's because our ordinance committee chose that number?
Yes, without benefit of public testimony that the Planning Commission heard.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Mr. Friedman?
I had a question. It gets into vacancy control in terms of if an owner sells their unit to the park, and maybe this is a different discussion, but I thought it might be relevant today. If the owner, instead of selling it to, when they sell it to another renter or another mobile home occupant, then the vacancy control it goes away, or the rent control goes away.
Correct. When the unit is sold, the park owner is free to adjust the rent.
And if they sell it back to the park, because there's been some other issues that have been brought to our attention where some of them are being sold back to the park, and then the park owns the unit and rents it. Is that consistent? Would that have any covering under the sham process, or would anything we're doing today affect that?
No, I don't believe that we're attempting nor able to regulate purchase from the park owner. If that's an arm's length legitimate transaction, I understand the consequence of it, but I'm not sure it's something we can regulate.
Okay, thanks. I just want a clarification on that. And I think Councilmember Dominguez answered my questions on the 25 versus 35.
Ms. Harmon, you got your question answered? Okay. If there aren't any other questions, we'll go to public comment. Rosalba Cordova, you'll be first, followed by Chris Barros. You need interpretation? No. Welcome.
I'll try my best. Let me practice my English.
If you like.
My name is Rosalba Cordova, and hi, everybody. I think it's a good idea that what he's saying, but I don't think it's a good idea to move people far away, because where I live at 1200 Punta Gorda, and there are families who have children. They go to school here. There are seniors that they cannot be moved away from their families. So I think
speak right into the microphone, please.
I think converting it to so they can own the land, and maybe it's even beneficial for the city too, because now they have to pay taxes. Anyway, so that's my comment on that, and I think they should be other restrictions and how they evict people, because they just evicted me, and they actually violate the mobile home residency law, and they evicted me only because I had a water heater, a shade, and an awning, and they brought the sheriff. The sheriff broke into my personal property. It's a trailer without a warrant. They got my purse, went through my purse, and I don't know how many more violations I can tell you if this is not a violation of the law that these people are doing to me. It's very unjustly and unethical from this business. This guy from Links Property Management, his name is Jonathan, had these big scissors to cut the locks. They cut the locks and everything, and they don't have a judgment against me. They don't. The judge hasn't given them a judgment. I don't know how. They got the right of possession back because I own the trailer, and it's under the DMV. It's registered under my name. And that's all my comments. Thank you very much for listening to me. And I thought I just brought this to your attention because I have been living in the city for 30 years. I have a business, a small business, and this is a small community, Santa Barbara. And it's a shame that this is happening here. I think it's not right. And I am a good citizen. I mean, I pay taxes to every single agency, the state, the city, even the real estate association. And I know, and I know what they are doing is wrong. You don't know how much damages they have done to my brain. They almost drove me crazy. I called like 30 attorneys, and nobody could help me. Maybe these senior attorneys can help me a little bit with this, but...
Ms. Cordova, don't go away. Ms. Sneddon has a question for you.
I do have a question. Does this fall under rental mediation, or because it's a mobile home, it doesn't? Or what are the... What would be the protocol?
I don't
in
believe the program's restricted that way. I'd be happy to take your number and contact rental housing mediation.
I already called them, and they couldn't help me.
Okay.
But thank you so much.
Mr. Kalan's office is willing to speak with you, so you can make an appointment with him if you go to Holly in the office right around the corner.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Ms. Barros, your turn. And you'll be followed by Jim Farned.
Madam Mayor, City Council members, thank you for all your hard work in this long, drawn-out procedure. Just two things I wanted to say. We wanted to implore you to take the 25-mile limit, as it would impact our lifestyles and our homes as we know it. And the other thing is, if vacancy decontrol isn't something that we can talk about at this time, that's fine, but we hope that we can address it later. It has basically made our senior affordable mobile home park no longer affordable to most people on a fixed income. Yeah. So that's all.
Okay. Thanks. Mr. Farned?
I'll add my thanks to those of Chris. And overall, I mean, we're pleased with the developments, and again, thanks for the work. It seems that we're still locked into rather antiquated terminology with radius of relocation when there ain't no such thing. It's hypothetical. That's of a concern, and it sets in chain a whole set of questions which might be seen to devolve finally then, ultimately, since that's what it's going to come down to, the calculation of fair market value. And I think that's going to be a vexed issue in this situation, and I'm not sure that enough attention has been given to how that market value will be in effect determined. For example, vacancy control. Person dies, older coach. Owner buys, and then, given the discretion the owner then exercises, raises the rent to the point that, nobody's buying it. They tear it down. They put in a manufactured home for $40,000, $50,000. Now they've got an expenditure of considerably less than $100,000, and they sell it for $180,000. There are places in our park that are on the market, have been put on the market in that manner. So I'm just saying, I'm not sure that means, because before, in an earlier day, radius of relocation meant that radius within which you were sure to find equitable accommodations. That doesn't exist anymore. Neither does it exist as a matrix for the calculation of fair market value. That's what I'm saying. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. That closes public comment. It's to the council now. Ms. Harmon, followed by Ms. Sneddon.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Mr. Klon, I do have a question. In connection with shifting the first-tier decision maker to community development, if a decision is taken there that an applicant wishes to appeal, does that then go to PC or does it come directly to us?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Harmon, it would follow the traditional path through the Planning Commission to the council.
Okay, great. Thank you. Well, now's the appropriate time for comments?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm certainly very supportive of this. I think your office for the really hard work, the Ordinance Committee for doing this work, it's obviously so important to our community. I am inclined to support a shorter relocation radius myself. Whatever we can do to protect vulnerable residents is of interest to me, and the testimony today, as well as the report, has certainly convinced me. So that's where I'm heading, and I won't make a motion so my fellow council members can discuss.
Very good. Ms. Snedden?
I just want to reiterate, too, that I would support the 25 relocation. I know we discussed it, and it came back a couple times to ordinance, and we certainly weren't unified in pushing for a larger radius. There was always the discussion of how small could we make that radius, so I would be supportive of the 25, along with the rest of the recommendations.
Okay. Mr. Dominguez.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I want to thank my neighbors and the community for being here, and also for your never-ending patience and reminding us and keeping on us. When Councilmember White and I put this on the agenda in 2016, we didn't anticipate that it would take this long, but there's been a lot of important work. And so thank you for staying involved, staying engaged, and thank you, staff, for working on this and getting this through, and for my colleagues for supporting it. I'm going to support the 25-mile radius. And if I may, Madam Mayor, I would make the motion.
Very good.
So I move the the staff recommendation.
And that was Mr. Friedman with a second, and it's your turn to talk.
I, too, am supporting the 25. I think you made a good case, and appreciate your diligence, the residents there, in particular Ms. Barros. In regards to vacant control, I know we've been communicating, and we'll continue to have those communications on how we can try to work through those issues and what our options are. So I'm committed to continuing to have those discussions with you and staff. So I'll be supporting the motion.
I'll be supporting the motion as well. I'm sorry it's not perfect. We're doing our best and trying to balance all of the needs in the community. And you certainly, you're always so pleasant when you're in the chambers and keeping an eye on everything over on the east side over there. So thank you very much. We'll go ahead and take a roll call vote on this one. Ms. Clerk.
Thank you. Madam Mayor and Council, a brief question. This is a motion by Councilmember Dominguez, seconded by Mayor Pro Tem Friedman, to approve the staff recommendation. Does that include the 25-mile radius?
A through D with a 25-mile radius.
Okay.
Correct.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Dominguez.
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Friedman.
Yes.
Councilmember Gutierrez.
Yes.
Councilmember Harmon.
Yes.
Councilmember Rouse.
Aye.
Councilmember Snedden.
Yes.
And Mayor Murillo.
Aye. That's unanimous. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Mr. Kalan. Do people need a break now? Yes. Okay. We'll take a 5-minute break before we go to the next item. Thank you. Back to order. Santa Barbara City Council, July 23rd, 2019. Madam Clerk, will you read item number 18, please?
Yes, item 18, council action options for the proposed initiative measure to eliminate zoning information reports by repealing Santa Barbara Municipal Code Section 28.87.220 and related code sections. Recommendation the council provide direction and take action on one or more action options for the proposed initiative measure to eliminate zoning information reports by repealing Santa Barbara Municipal Code Section 28.87.220 and related code sections, including but not limited to the following. 1. Take action to initiate general plan and zoning text amendments by approving the accompanying resolution entitled A Resolution of the Council of the City of Santa Barbara initiating general plan and zoning text amendments in response to an initiative petition to repeal ordinances relating to zoning information reports, and or 2, place a ZIR initiative on the ballot by approving the accompanying resolution entitled, a resolution of the Council of the City of Santa Barbara calling and giving notice to the holding of a special municipal election to be held in the City of Santa Barbara on Tuesday, November 5th, 2019, for the submission to the voters of an initiative measure pertaining to the repeal of the city's zoning report ordinance, and or 3, take concurrent and immediate action to direct administrative suspension of the ZIR program through reallocation of fiscal year 2020 appropriated resources or otherwise.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Kalan, you're up again.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of the council. Last week, the council was presented with 2 items on its agenda related to an initiative that has received sufficient signatures to qualify for the November ballot. That initiative called for the repeal of a program the city has called Zoning Information Report. That program began in 1976 and was an effort at offering some window into city records and city thinking for prospective buyers of residential real estate other than condominiums. In 2014-2015, the county grand jury issued a harshly critical report relating to ZIRs, and not criticizing the concept, but criticizing the execution, saying that there had been inconsistent and unreliable results. And as I read the report, those inconsistencies and unreliabilities are largely the result of human involvement in reaching opinions as to whether something's a violation or not. You've heard testimony about issues being missed and then discovered years later with disastrous financial consequences for the people involved. So that's the context in which last week, with 2 agenda items, one, asking the council to take some of the financial steps necessary to seal our arrangement with Los Angeles County to run the election. The second one was an action item that asked the council whether it wanted staff to prepare what's called an Elections Code 9212 report. And that report serves the purpose of explaining to the council and public any issues, whether they're financial or zoning or general plan related to the item. The council chose not to do that. Instead, feeling that sufficient evidence had been presented, that it wanted to give consideration to actually adopting the initiative without going through the expense of causing the voters to need to vote on it. I mentioned then that there were procedural concerns that we needed to look at, and with the help of Mr. Casey and the Community Development Department, as well as several lawyers in my office, we did that late last week. So there are a couple things I want to report on. First, in terms of adoption, it is clear to me at least that the 5-vote requirement of the city charter would apply, so that were you to wish to adopt the initiative measure, because it's a zoning ordinance, you'd need a supermajority of 5 votes. That's easy enough. I'd also advise, if you did that, to give it a second reading. Let's treat it like an ordinary ordinance for belt and suspenders. That's not the major concern, however. This so-called Elections Code 9212 report that I mentioned to you identifies in the state law a number of subjects that you can talk about. Right at the top of the list is consistency with the general plan. And so last week, not really being clear on whether the council would get into a substantive discussion then or ask us to do a 9212, we did a little bit of preparation, meaning I contacted Ms. Brooke, your city planner, ahead of the meeting, and did some very brief research, enough that I could say to you last week that I thought general plan consistency was something we at least needed to look at. So we did that, and I found that the general plan describes in its housing element, which was certified, adopted by the council and certified by the state in 2015, that housing element includes language that collectively collectively, we think more likely than not a court would conclude is mandatory language requiring you, in the words of the housing element, to, quote, continue to require zoning information reports. Under California law, zoning has to be consistent with the general plan in order to be valid. So in Santa Barbara, we have incorporated that locally in Title 30. What that means is that a zoning ordinance, like the ZIR ordinance, or like the repeal of the ZIR ordinance proposed in the initiative, has to be consistent with the general plan at the time it's adopted. Here, if you accept that the general plan requires ZIRs, I'd be of the opinion that a court would likely find council action adopting this initiative to be void ab initio. That means that the act is a nullity. It would never become effective, because if the zoning is inconsistent with the general plan, it's a nullity. Now, not the other way around. State law has many ways that you can bring the zoning into conformity with the general plan. And that's actually been the subject of case law. So one, not trying to be cute, but quoting the Supreme Court, the court has said the tail does not wag the dog. Your general plan, including specifically the housing element, that our certified housing element is really a cherished, valuable asset for the community. Without it, housing development of any kind is at risk. So protecting that housing element is one way of avoiding a de facto moratorium on development in the community. It's a very serious document. If it is indeed inconsistent, then the council can't adopt without it being void. Likewise, the voters on election day, were they to approve the measure, the council and my office would be in the uncomfortable position of explaining to the voters that what they just did wasn't valid, or potentially wasn't valid. In any event, whether we're right or wrong doesn't much matter. It's the uncertainty created that is particularly difficult. So we tried to get to be as constructive as possible in achieving the policy end that we inferred from last week. And the policy end we inferred was to eliminate the problems with the ZIR program that were identified by the initiative proponents and the grand jury, namely human error. We also sought to try and take the council's action of getting rid of the ZIR ordinance by adopting the initiative and chart you a path to do that. That path is before you in recommendation number 1. The way you would accomplish that is to direct initiation of a general plan amendment and zoning text amendment. What that would do is we would process concurrently the general plan amendment, so when time came to repeal the ZIR, the general plan would be ready for it. The problem with that is that process can't be completed before the deadlines for the election. So there is no way for the council to achieve that policy end in a time frame that's consistent with what the election code requires us to do with the thousands of signatures that were gathered on the petition. There is something that state law has changed, though, in the last year to help with this situation. Under former law, once the council certified the sufficiency of the signatures on the petitions, which you did last week, the petition was effectively owned by the public and couldn't be altered. State law was changed last year to allow the initiative proponent to withdraw the initiative if they wish before the 88th day before the election, which in this case is, I believe it's a Friday, August 9th. So if the council can come to a resolution that's acceptable to the initiative proponent with or without a general plan amendment, the initiative proponent has the power to withdraw the measure. They don't have to, but they have the power to do it. The second option that we identified was simply to put it on the ballot. Whether it's lawful or not doesn't matter when the council's putting it on the ballot. Putting it on the ballot does not constitute your conclusion that it's lawful. The same way, and this is important for the public to understand, when we received the petition in April, it was referred to me by the city clerk, and the task I have under the elections code at that time is only to prepare a ballot title and summary so that people signing the petitions at the supermarkets know what a neutral city official thinks it means. And it was very simple. It said, this repeals zoning information reports. That is the only role. I am not empowered to give advice to the initiative proponents, nor could I as a matter of ethics, because I can't represent people who are trying to undo city policy. Whether they are right or not is not my decision. So the second path would be to put it on the ballot. Now, the third recommendation we have was also in recognition of your policy end. And Mr. Casey and I have worked out, and the language is in recommendation 3, a process whereby the City Council could direct an immediate administrative suspension of the ZIR program as a way of, number one, preventing the unreliable and inconsistent results immediately. Number two, showing good faith to the public and initiative proponents that your policy objective that you expressed last week is what you intend to carry out. There are many variations within that range. Another option that is not in the report, but which I'd be remiss not to mention, is that the city has amended the ZIR ordinance many times since the general plan was adopted. It would be possible to amend the ZIR ordinance without amending the general plan, provided the council can conclude that the changes are consistent. So if you wish to do something quickly, the two quickest things you can do are, one, direct Mr. Casey to administratively suspend the program immediately. Number two, you could initiate a zoning text amendment not to repeal, but to modify the ZIR program in some manner and do so without a general plan amendment. So that's really a third path beyond the two that I identified with Mr. Casey in the report. I'm happy to answer questions, and thank you.
Okay, very good. And I know that representatives from the Association of Realtors are going to be first up in public speaking, but Ms. Sneddon and then Mr. Rouse.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I have a question about, I guess we could call that option 4, the one you just mentioned, amending the ZIR. And if we were to initiate that type of amendment, would that go, or could that go to Planning Commission to determine what an appropriate solution to that might be, or amendment, or what would be the process past our recommending that?
Thank you, Madam Mayor, Councilmember Sneddon. Were you to adopt a resolution initiating a zone text amendment, it would be sent to the Planning Commission and a public hearing would be noticed. The Planning Commission's role is to make recommendations on those amendments to you. Those recommendations are not binding, but they are information you need to consider. We have discussed it internally, and we believe we can get Planning Commission recommendations back to you, or we can get recommendations from the Planning Commission by September 24th.
And Planning Commission could then take into account the grand jury recommendations or recommendations from the Realtor Associations or from the public.
Precisely. This approach is secular in the sense that the grand jury report is information. the initiative is information, and it's informing a legislative process. So if you were to start a zoning amendment, you would expect that legislative process to be informed by the initiative, by the grand jury, by whatever facts the public brought forward.
And would that need to come back through ordinance committee, or would go to planning commission for their recommendations and then back to council?
I would hope we can avoid ordinance committee with the council direction to do so.
That's possible. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Rouse?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Mr. Kalani wanted to confirm something on the calendar. So when you say come back on the 24th, is that when we receive Planning Commission's recommendations, or is that for adoption?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Rouse, let the right end of the horse answer that question. If Ms. Brooke could answer that, that would be good.
Thank you for that colorful analogy.
Hopefully I'm the front end of the horse. Anyway.
Thanks, Ms. Brooke.
Thanks for the levity. Madam Mayor and Councilmember Rouse, that date by which we said we could bring it back to council, it would include both Planning Commission's recommendation and to council for introduction of an ordinance amendment, and then following the second reading would follow.
Okay, very good. I don't see any other lights. Mr. Schultheis, would you like to come up representing the group that gathered the signatures? And thank you.
Good afternoon, Madam Mayor and council members. As you know, I'm Thomas Schultheis, president of both the Santa Barbara Association of Realtors and the Santa Barbara Realtors Protecting Homeowners campaign. As you know, our organization has worked on creating solutions to the inaccuracies of the zoning reports for the past 10 years. In an act of good faith, we believe that our organization and the city can finally agree on substantive changes to the ZIR program. We applaud Council Members Rouse and Harmon for working with us on these changes, which include immediately halting the current ZIR program, having the seller provide a link to the street file, no city inspections or expression of opinion by city staff shall be permitted, and having no fee associated with it. Once you pass this solution today, we will be providing our members the current URL to the street file, so those members who want to implement this policy immediately, even before the official enactment date, can do so. However, the current system to provide the street file information online is not easily navigable, and therefore we encourage city staff to immediately work to establish an easy mechanism for the seller to provide the buyer a link to the street file for records for properties. These changes are bringing the ZIR program into the 21st century and making it a disclosure, just like many other aspects of a real estate transaction. Thank you for working with us to save the taxpayers of the city $200,000 in election costs and creating a reasonable solution without having to go to the ballot. We look forward to closing this chapter and moving forward to the city, with the city to solve complex problems in creative ways in order to better protect and serve the residents of the city that we all hold dear to heart. Thank you.
Mr. Schultheis, I have a question for you. So I know that by law, your group was able to work with the city attorney after last week's meeting, and that you've come up with an alternative resolution, so not to put it on the ballot. Is that correct?
Correct. We believe that we have ample support, and we've come to a good compromise here.
Okay. So what if one of your clients wants a physical inspection? That's one thing that worries me, is that
from
a buyer.
Most of our clients get physical inspections, and we hire the appropriate professionals to advise them based on the condition, health, safety, zoning, permitting issues of the property. I believe we have such individuals here with us today.
Oh, I see. No city inspection.
Correct.
You just want no city.
We are very pro-information.
Okay. Well, I understand this has been negotiated, and so you're saying a private inspector then?
Well, the current process has many private inspectors. What this would be doing would be trimming down the ZIR program to eliminate the human element and increase accuracy. We would be referring the client to the street file, which would be all city records online, as well as a number of many other things that we'd be advising them.
And did I hear you say no fee associated with it?
Correct.
So do we think, Mr. Casey, that we'll have some administrative fees, just photocopying or staff time? I mean, if I know the ZIR was $500 or $400, but if there's reasonable fees associated with our staff looking up things. Mr. Casey, did you have an opinion?
Oh, just Madam Mayor and council members, if it's an electronic access link to the street file that they then disclose and provide that to the buyer, I don't think there's any fee necessary for that. If they come in and want hard physical copies of the street file, there is just a standard fee that's already in place for a cost per copy on that.
Okay, well that's fine then. Okay, Mr. Schultheis, so there's other public speakers.
Thank you.
Okay, a question from Ms. Sneddon.
Yes, I have to confess, having not been part of any negotiations or knowing what the terms of those are, I had heard some of those things you listed, but not all of those that you listed. So I just want to know that there's an understanding that this is going, if it goes this direction, to Planning Commission, and that these are not, I'm asking, do you believe that there's an understanding that each one of those that you mentioned, which I actually asked you to repeat because some of those I have not heard?
We believe there is an understanding. Would you like me to repeat some?
Please, because I don't.
We would be, let me go back to this page here. It would be eliminating the human element from this process. There would be no city inspections or expression of opinion by city staff. There would be no fee associated with it. Pretty much the program would be reduced to the seller being required to provide the buyer a link to the street file so the buyer could look at what records are available online and make a determination and hire the appropriate professionals to interpret those documents.
Thank you.
One last question. How much money did you spend to gather your signatures?
I don't have enough information for a specific number for you.
Okay. Well, if someone has it towards the end of the meeting, I'd be grateful to hear that number. Thank you, Mr. Schultheis.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Mr. Cullen.
Madam Mayor, I'd like to make give some advice in response to Councilmember Sneddon. The way I approach the question of the conditions that Mr. Schultheis just described is, are they consistent with the general plan? And the answer from our office is yes, we think so. It's the council's determination.
Mr. Rouse.
Yeah, just a quick comment as well. I'll be glad to address the list and the reasoning behind where we are today, so that we can get to where we want to go.
Okay, thank you.
That makes sense to you?
We'll call on you first. Thanks. So Jarrett Gorin, you'll be up. You have 3 minutes. You'll be followed by Marita Haraitlik, Mary Turley.
Good afternoon, Madam Mayor, members of the council. I'm Jarrett Gorin from Vanguard Planning, local land use consultant. Lots of experience dealing with ZIRs and the side effects of ZIRs. I'm here to support the solution that the Association of Realtors and the city have come up with that Mr. Schultheis just described. It's great to see a mutually acceptable proposal come forward after we've been debating this issue for so many years. The problem isn't that ZIRs exist. It's what the ZIR entails. It's the fallout from errors and inconsistencies that come out of the existing ZIR process that's the problem. So the joint solution addresses that. It converts the ZIR from what it's morphed into over all of these years back into something that makes sense. And the property and permit records, they should be readily available and easily available to buyers or sellers or really anybody in the public that wants to see them. And this joint solution is going to ensure that they will be. They kind of are now, but this will improve it. People will be able to get the information they want, and they'll be able to do it without having to pay exorbitant fees or deal with weeks-long delays that can really impact escrows and transactions. Even when people do it in advance, they're not waiting till the last minute. These things still impact transactions, and it's a real problem for both buyers and sellers. People can make their own decisions when they have the information themselves. And if they want, to address your question, Madam Mayor, if they want the city's opinion, they can come in and get it. They can come to the counter at 630 Garden Street. That's like my satellite office. I'm there several days a week. People come in and do this all the time, and your staff answers their questions, and your staff is good at answering their questions. So the city's opinion is always available to people, even if it's not because of a mandatory ZIR. I never dreamed I'd be standing up here at this podium to support a proposal that came out of the city to eliminate these mandatory inspections of people's homes. I think this is a really good thing. It took a really long time to get to this point, and I'm glad that we're finally here. So I urge you to please take action today and approve these proposed revisions to the ZIR process. Thanks.
Thank you. Ms. Hawryluk? Mary Turley after you. Oh, and Chris Barros is giving some time to Mary. Okay, welcome.
Hi, my name is Marita Hurelic, and I'm a resident and homeowner in Santa Barbara. Good afternoon, Council. I briefly wanted to share my experience with the ZIR. We purchased our home in the spring of 2018. We had a ZIR informing us that our driveway was a gravel driveway. We're currently pursuing a land use application, so in the fall of 2018, my architect contacted the city to show them pictures of our real asphalt driveway that was built as the as-built plan showed. The zoning officer responded at the time she did the ZIR, it was gravel, and that I was supposed to contact the building department. I contacted the building department, and they told me they'd have to charge me to come out and see what my driveway was. I recontacted the zoning officer, and basically I haven't heard from her since my contact in the spring of 2018. So our gravel driveway is a bigger issue than you might think. It's a code violation that would need to be fixed if that was true, and it impacts our land use application regarding stormwater requirements. So it's not a simple matter of just saying he said, she said. And right now we're still pursuing our land use application, but the issue is still up in the air. My husband and I have purchased 3 homes in California, 2 not in this county, and all of those experiences provided us with inspection reports, disclosure documents that we felt provided enough information for us to make a decision. We did not find the ZIR any more helpful in that process. We actually had a building and safety issue that was found through the inspection process and not through the ZIR process, which needed to be fixed. I actually was coming here today to speak both as a homeowner and I've worked in the land use arena in life, so I wanted to feel like I was representing homeowners who've gone through the experience, but also with an enlightened knowledge of what the land use process really is and what imperfections in it can do. I was actually going to ask you to abolish the ZIR, but in just listening to the changes that were made, I feel it's a very appropriate process to move forward. And so I would recommend listening to those changes. Thank you very much.
Ms. Turley, you'll have 5 minutes, and Vijaya Jamal Amadaka will be after you.
Thank you very much. I have Thank you, Madam Mayor and council people. Thank you for discussing this subject. I am a member of the Allied Neighborhoods Association, and so I am reading a letter that was prepared with feedback from that group. So you will be hearing from homeowners besides supporters of the ballot measure. And this is in regards to this. I just want to let you know that on July 15th, the Allied Neighborhood Association held its monthly meeting members of Allied discussed neighborhood and city issues and items related to the agenda for Tuesday's City Council meeting. None of the members of the Allied were made aware through the posted agenda that the council would consider adopting the ZIR initiative at Tuesday's council meeting. Had any of our members been made aware through the posted agenda details that the council would consider adopting the ZIR initiative, thereby repealing the city's ZIR ordinance at the 16th meeting, we would have acted to submit a letter, and individual neighborhood associations and others also would have been provided the opportunity to comment. Since the Brown Act requires that a meaningful agenda be posted in advance of meetings, that the discussion and the actions be limited to matters on the agenda, and that meetings materials be made available, and none of these actions took place, including no report that was on the agenda, we ask the city to invalidate the action to bring the ZIR initiative back for council adoption today, and that it hold a special meeting devoted to the city's ZIR ordinance and ZIR initiative. This would ensure the city makes a decision within the 10-day period. This meeting actually has provided many, many other alternatives. Allied respectfully submits this special meeting to cure and correct the action taken on item 23 on the 16th meeting and the lack of notice concerning the failure to request the report and the city's options. I'm skipping a bit because you have this copy and in the nature of time. To educate new council members and the public on this important issue, we ask that all items related to the ZIR initiative be discussed in this meeting. This would include the following topics, and I'm not going to go through those, but they're all listed there as far as options. As a side note, just my personal comments. This is not about my preference for ZIRs. I'm actually undecided in regards to my personal support. I was actually looking forward to the ballot measure so that we could actually discuss it and see what the options were. Instead, it appeared that on the 16th, that option was going to then be taken away. So I just want the public dialogue on this subject. I have experienced the benefits of the ZIR. When an illegal dwelling unit was called out for a property that my husband and I purchased, and in 1992, I have also seen the negative aspects of this program, as an unpermitted kitchen was not identified and called out on the ZIR. And this could impact and be a real big problem for future sale and delay any problems. So again, I want the public dialogue on this ballot measure. Either way, I personally support changes to the text of the ordinance. Thank you very much.
Okay. Ms. Jamal Lamadaka, followed by Steve Epstein, Ray Harthorn, Ray Maboob. Welcome.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The League was very concerned when we read the staff report and so we are changing our entire presentation over here because we were strongly opposed to amending the zoning laws by initiative, for one thing. It's not good planning. But now that there is a mutually acceptable resolution to this, we support this process. By going back to the Planning Commission, you're opening up more public comment, and we will be following the issue over there. ZIRs, we acknowledge, were not being implemented properly, but I understand why the city had them for the protection of the home buyers. We still, but if the city is not willing to change the process as much, or to train your inspectors better, or to make it more consistent, which is what the League would support, a more systematic amendment of the ZIR, we would really support that. We will continue to observe this and provide our comments as it goes through the process. Thank you.
Mr. Epstein?
Madam Mayor, Council. By the way, in light of recent news stories, I'm definitely going by Epstein versus Epstein.
Epstein.
That last name is
I'll try to remember.
Is not good.
Like Bierstein.
And
Okay.
specific to the city attorney's comments, for the record, I am often referred to as the back end of the horse. So I just want to go on record here with that as well. Madam Mayor, Council, thank you for all the time and consideration you guys have put into this process. I really appreciate it. There were some things that were addressed last week that I thought were a little inaccurate, bordering on gross inaccuracies, and unfortunately this isn't British Parliament where we get to yell out at each other. I think that's kind of fun, but we don't get to do that. But the ZIRs have been billed during this process as a consumer and or health and safety protection process, but the ZIR, or the zoning inspectors, are not building inspection officials, and they're not trained to do that. So that's actually not happening, really. I mean, yes, if a whole unit is created that's completely unpermitted and contractors who are unlicensed did it, yes, it could be a health and safety concern. But they haven't been trained to do that. Many, if not most, of the ZIRs now are done on a drive-by basis. That's not helping health and safety either, because the inspector's not entering the property. I mean, unless they see an illegal deck hanging off the side of the house, but again, neighbors would have already called on that. We're not going through this process so we can sell more homes, and that was suggested last week. We're doing this to protect our clients who have suffered horribly as a result of the ZIR process, and that, in my opinion, is true consumer protectionism. I urge the Council to adopt the compromise resolution tonight so that we can all move on to a more fair and equitable process. Thank you.
Mr. Hawthorne, I saw you back there. I don't see Mr. Mahboob. Did he have to leave? Then the final speaker will be Bob Hart. Welcome.
Mayor and council members, my name is Roy Hawthorne. I'm a certified building official and plans examiner and do work for city and county building departments. In the past, I worked for the city of Santa Barbara from 85 to 96 as a plan checker, assistant building official, and your building official. I was the administrator of the ZIR program for a period of 6 years, and followed that I took on the designated custodian of records, which was tied at the hip with that program. The program's been difficult to administer from the very beginning because of the loose definition of what records are. And in the inception of the program, the records were looked at much more narrowly, and pretty much the only thing that was transmitted to the buyers was what the zoning is, how many units were on the property, which was defined by how many kitchens there were and how many parking spaces there were. Later, they added smoke detectors and made it health and safety. So that was the program up until 93. That was also about the time computer records came into play and the compiling of more and more records. And the planning division took over the process, and it morphed, it changed. Unfortunately, the records were compromised at the very beginning. The city lost many records in the 1970s. They threw out many of the archived drawings when they discontinued keeping them. The AIA took over that project and recovered many of them out of the City Hall dumpster and started the AIA archives. It was a completely separate and private operation that continued until 1993 when I reined it back in after City Attorney Jim Kahan advised me their operation was not a proper records repository for operating the city. So the program's been compromised from the very beginning because the records have been outside the city's control. The street files were off-site with Santa Barbara County for a period of 4 years between 1977 and 1981. What came back had not been inventoried before it left and when it came back. And those records were a mess when they came back. So to delve into the details of how many bedrooms and bathrooms and square footage. It was an impossible task to begin with. So I applaud the idea of taking out the human element and just giving the public the records that are out there. But there are more records than just the street files.
Thanks so much for your time.
Sure. They also
Yeah.
include planning files and the tax.
Your time is up.
Tax files.
Mr. Hart.
Thank you.
Come on up.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Madam Mayor and council members. I'm Bob Hart. I'm the Association Executive for the Santa Barbara Association of Realtors, as well as the proponent on this initiative. I have to assume that somehow this afternoon you're going to get a document that has a lot of whereases and therefores in it that's known as a resolution that we have worked on a compromise on. Assuming that that is the case and that resolution gets passed today, we will be thanking you for your efforts. We want to thank you already for the openness and the spirit of cooperation of the council members and the staff that we've, in this last week, there's been a lot of conversations, a lot of work done, and working together, we've come up with a solution to meet the needs of all the parties. So we're hoping today that we're going to find that we have an administrative amendment and zone text amendment that's going to happen, and that most importantly to all of our members is that we have an administrative suspension to the ZIR program immediately. That's a big component of that, and then to work through our compromise solution as proposed by Council Members Rouse and Harmon, and thank you for your efforts on that, speaking on cell phones over the weekend, et cetera, to make sure that we get things accomplished. We appreciate all the efforts of that. So I basically just want to say thank you for that. We appreciate the work. We look forward to getting this done, and thanks.
Okay, very good. That closes public comment, and we have put the resolution on the projector. It might be good, Ms. Clerk, to put page 2, which is actually the resolving part, section 1 and section 2. So that would be one thing. Mr. Rouse, go ahead. You're up first.
Well, thank you, Madam Mayor. I thought I would address some of Council Member Sneddon's concerns and talk about what were we doing all weekend. And
thank you.
It's kind of appropriate that I lead off only because I was in my 9th year on council. This has been a constant struggle, the ZIRs, and I've been a supporter of the ZIRs and staff and the reform of the ZIRs and whatnot. And we, as I mentioned last week, we fell short. We never got them going to the level they should. They were never providing the consumer protection they were designed to, and they were chronically unreliable and inaccurate. So I've come around, and the timeliness was because the Real Estate Association went out and collected signatures. And these signatures are, it either goes on or it doesn't go on as of August 9th. So there had to be some reasonable dialogue. There had to be some discussion. What was the best way to resolve this? And last week we had kind of jumped in to adopt the resolution because we had, myself, I seconded Mr. Dominguez's motion to adopt only because I thought that was the cleanest, quickest way to do it. And then, of course, now we realize that would have been in violation of what was a very public, long process. I was a part of that too, was the housing element of the general plan update. And certainly we don't want to go there and as Mary Turley pointed out, that's not how you're supposed to do things, and she's absolutely correct. This is, for us, a matter of cooperation and a matter of good faith, because the Real Estate Association, were we to go forward with the election, is on an odd year. We're having 4 districts up in the election. We'd have to add the other 2 for this general issue. That's a $200,000 idea. So by withdrawing this initiative and having the faith that we're going to follow through and do what we say we're going to do today, they're going to save the taxpayers $200,000, which I think is not insignificant. And it's important that as we go forward, we understand what we're doing is not only got precedence, as Mr. Kahlon said, we've amended the ZIR thing before. And now we simply plan to replace it with this other, probably more accurate, more valuable technique that is used generally anyway by most agents and their clients. And I think also by the fact that it's available electronically, any of us can go home today and punch in our own address and get our street file if we so desire. So I think it's good public policy. It's what happens in most of the rest of the agencies around, and I think is what we should follow up. I think today Mr. Kalan's handed out some suggested ideas for motions, and I really think the first thing we need to do is direct our city administrator to immediately suspend the program, and that we form these resolutions to be submitted to Planning Commission for comment. I think we also need to, basically direct the city administrator to reallocate resources within the building department and basically defund the program that does fund the ZIRs, and reallocate those monies, or whatever way he sees fit to do this. But it should happen today. And I think going forward, we need to perform the way that works for the most of the people out there. And I think that everybody, buyers, sellers, neighbors, agents, non-agents, anybody, is going to be benefited by this change in this what was a great intention, but never lived up to its job and has become an impediment and a great expense to both parties from time to time. So with that, that's just my comments regarding what we were doing in those super secret sessions, which were not super secret, but we were working cooperatively with our business community. And I believe we came up with a very good Santa Barbara style solution to present to you guys, to all of us, to ratify hopefully and move forward with the process.
Okay, before we go to Ms. Harmon, one of the public speakers questioned how we agendaized last week's meeting. Mr. Kalan, would you address that? I think you did render an opinion that it was fine.
I'd be happy to. I believe, first of all, that our collective role as watchdogs in support of public transparency is part of the oath all of us took. Allied should feel comfortable that Monday morning I got a call from the district attorney's office and had a good conversation, which I followed with a written response about last week. As ought to be clear from today, the council did not adopt this measure last week. What the council did was direct us to bring it back this week. The Brown Act has 3 exceptions to its agenda requirement. One are brief responses to comments. Second one's escaping me, but the third one is action consistent with your own rules to set something for future discussion. So that's what you did at staff's urging. That was not on the agenda, and the reason's not a mystery. We assumed, and that's my bad, that the council would want this 9212 report. And I also need to offer, in essence, an apology for the process here to the public. The state law regarding initiatives is very unforgiving on time. That 88th day before the election is a hard and fast deadline. And as I mentioned at the outset, the state law change to allow Mr. Hart as the proponent to withdraw the measure is an open invitation from the state to negotiate these issues rather than end them on the ballot at great expense to everyone.
Understood. Ms. Harmon?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I obviously support this compromise. Substantively, my position on the ZIRs hasn't changed from last week. There's no need to relitigate that. In my view, it was a very, very well-intentioned policy that has outlived its usefulness in light of the state-mandated disclosures of today. What I really like about this compromise that was crafted is that it allows us to remedy a bureaucratic process that really isn't serving its purpose anymore, and it frankly gives better information to our citizens than that which they receive under the ZIR program, and to do it in a way that's more efficient and expeditious than any of the other options that were presented. So to me, it's really about doing the right thing for our citizens, what's best for them in terms of their ability to get information when they're making this biggest purchase of their lives, and to do it in a way that saves them $200,000 of their hard-earned tax dollars, which to me sounds like the epitome of efficiency. So that's really where I came down on this. I would also like to echo Councilmember Rouse and just really celebrate and acknowledge the teamwork that went into thinking about these new ideas from very many people, particularly our city attorney, city administrator, as well as SBAOR. I mean, it just was really exciting to be a part of a process where people were thinking creatively about how to do what's best for the residents of the city of Santa Barbara. And I felt that in every discussion, and it was a great thing to be a part of. In my view, it's an excellent compromise. It achieves our goals, it saves a lot of money, and I think, frankly, that's what it's all about. So I will be supporting that compromise as well. Thank you.
Ms. Snedden and then Mr. Friedman.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd like to say I do support the concept of ZIRs, and I can also see that they're inconsistent in how they're executed. This is something I acknowledged last week as well. I'm supportive of reform of the ZIR, and however this came about, I am supportive of there being an amendment to the ZIRs. I'm not a fan of negotiations that don't involve the public, that do not involve neighborhood associations. I will be supporting this going forward to the Planning Commission so that it can see the light of day. I'm not very supportive of how this came to us through this referendum, and even though I'm a proponent of amending the ZIR, or was even maybe a proponent of abolishing it, this process has not been, in my mind, satisfactory, and I'll be happy that it's going to the Planning Commission. Having said that, I can speak for myself. I'm not in a position to promise that the Planning Commission will see this the same way. They probably will. But in this negotiation that happened, it happened with people who maybe don't have the authority to speak for the whole council. And I realize I'm in the minority, so, that's fine. It'll go forward either way. I just wanted to voice my concern that the public has not really had a chance to weigh in on this, and I'd like them to, even if the end result is the same. I myself saw this document an hour before the meeting. I have not had time to speak with my constituents, to digest it. So I'm happy the compromise came about, and I'm happy that those who made that compromise are happy with the compromise, and it may end up being just fine. But for me, until that goes through Planning Commission and has public approval, frankly, I'd rather it goes to the ballot and have people vote so that it has public input. We also need to really honor our general plan. That is a public process with stakeholders, took 6 years to implement, has a housing element, is passed by the state. I mean, we really need to hold that up, as that is our document that we're holding to. So I'd like to stay consistent with that. But I completely agree that the ZIRs have been mishandled. They cause a lot of detriment. They're not evenly meted out, and that needs to be fixed. So that's what I have to say to that. I'll be recommending this only if it can go to Planning Commission, and that it's not seen as a signing on a dotted line of agreement that would take away public process of it going to Planning Commission and hearing public comment.
Okay, Mr. Friedman.
Before I make comments, I do have one question, and it actually came from some of the public comment tonight, is if we move forward with basically defunding the program right now, what happens to any, there's probably only a handful of them, but any current cases? There was a public comment today said there's a case that's going through the system right now that is because of this. How does that continue to go through? Unless I misheard the public comment. I do get a little confused there, Mr. Casey.
Well, Madam Mayor and council members, I'm not exactly sure of the details of the case. I think if you give me direction, I will direct staff to no longer prepare ZIRs, and we won't finish executing ZARs that are in the middle of the process. If there's a zoning violation or some issue that we're having to resolve, we have to continue to pursue that. We have a zoning ordinance to uphold, and we will continue to do so. But we will no longer be requiring ZIRs, and we won't finish any that might be in the queue right now.
That answers my question. Thank you.
Madam Mayor, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Mayor Pro Tem Friedman, let me add to that just a little bit. I'm fully expecting that Mr. Casey will ask me to prepare something I would call an estoppel letter so that the brokers with this not repealed but inactivated law can feel comfortable not obtaining ZARs until any amendment happens. And then, if I may, Mayor, to Council Member Sneddon, initiating the zone text amendment and sending it to the Planning Commission is our means of civic engagement on changes like this. Thank you.
Are you good?
Great.
Okay.
Thank you. So just briefly, so last week I did support the action that was taken, and the reasoning was that there was a compelling case due to the number of instances that were raised to my attention of inaccurate or inconsistent ZIRs causing harm to homeowners. But once Mr. Colon had done his research and come back that it was inconsistent with the general plan, to me that raised a flag. And then in addition, if there was to be an election of $200,000 plus, and it still might be inconsistent, I was trying to find what are our options. So I'm glad that there is a compromise that has been worked out, that has been presented to us, and it has future public comment before it's adopted, such as going through the Planning Commission and eventually coming back to us. I hope Congress is listening, because anytime there's a compromise, I think it's a good thing, and I'll be supporting the motion.
We don't have a motion yet, I don't think, right?
Or what Councilman Rouse was bringing up, so I'll be supporting the motion whenever it's made.
Okay, Mr. Dominguez, you're next.
So I appreciate all the effort that went into arriving at this joint solution. I think the upshot is there's going to be more information for more people, and that allows better decision making. This doesn't legalize zoning or coding violations. It doesn't have that impact, and so I think that's one thing that we need to repeat, that it doesn't change if you're building something that's illegal and unsafe. You are still breaking the law, and there's still enforcement opportunities out there. Too many of the old ZIRs had mistakes and major inconsistencies, and most of them were catching minor inconsistencies that we weren't necessarily following up on anyways. And it was a counterintuitive scenario where lawbreakers, criminals were gaming the system, and then honest mom and pop families were paying the price. We've created almost a scofflaw industrial complex where some people knew they would just go in, do something even without drawing a permit, and risk getting caught rather than doing it the right way. So another lesson learned here, hopefully by our councils, we've got to be more proactive on these bigger ticket problems, and not to continue Mr. Kalan's animal metaphors, but we've got to grab the bull by the horns. We really have to be proactive. When we hear a large community group complaining over an extended period of time, we need to be at the forefront of solving the problem, and we need to do it transparently and openly with all stakeholders involved. But we can't prolong that forever when some of our poorest residents are paying the price. And then finally, there's just not enough opportunities in the world for me to vote with Mr. Gorn and Mr. Epstein. So I'm going to have to seize this one right here.
Very good. Mr. Rouse, would you like to make a motion, please?
Yeah, I'll be making the motion. I just want to make one last comment regarding good faith. Good faith in terms of discussion, good faith in terms of negotiation. We didn't negotiate a deal point or try to make something unilaterally. I mean, this was something that had to be done in a timely manner because of the election laws. If this did, in fact, go to the ballot on an odd-year election for a special election of these two extra districts, there'd be all 25 people out there voting, for this up or down for $200,000. So that was not a viable option. And this is something we've been talking about, as Mr. Schulteis said, for a decade, my entire council career anyway. So it'd be nice to go to the Realtors Fiesta party without having to talk about the stupid ZIRs for once. But I do think it's the right thing for the entire community. This is not for the real estate association. This is for our citizens, for our own sanity, and making these transactions work. So I am going to read this motion, if I may, Madam Mayor. It's in two parts. I move that the council direct an immediate administrative suspension of the ZIR program through reallocation of fiscal year 2020 appropriated reserves or otherwise as the city administrator sees fit. The staff and city attorney are also directed and authorized to provide such assistance as is necessary for real estate brokers, agents, sellers, and buyers in order to implement the administrative suspension without negative impacts on current transactions, which is the estoppel Mr. Clontz referred to. Second part of the motion would be I also move the council waive the full reading and adopt a resolution of the council of the city of Santa Barbara initiating zoning text amendments in response to an initiative petition to repeal ordinances relating to zoning information reports.
Is there a second? So that's from Ms. Harmon.
Madam Mayor, I'm embarrassed that the title of the resolution is slightly different. Let me read that into the record.
Please.
A resolution of the Council of the City of Santa Barbara initiating zoning text amendments to convert the zoning information report program into a records disclosure law.
Yes, thank you.
My apologies. I had the wrong
And is the seconder, you're okay with that? Okay, very good. I haven't spoken yet. I'll be voting against the motion to be consistent. I'd like to be the voice of the home buyers who have benefited from the ZIRs over the years, and the residents whose neighborhoods who've been protected from illegal construction and add-ons. I'd like to thank our city staff who've worked really hard over the years in good faith to do the right thing under our policy to promote the well-being of our residents and our neighborhoods. So with all due respect, I'll be voting no. Ms. Sneddon, you have something else to add?
I do have a question. Is inherent in that motion that it will be going to Planning Commission?
I think that was part of
Yes, it is a resolution directing it to the Planning Commission.
And does Planning Commission get this text already written for them?
They will get this text and probably a draft ordinance amendment.
Thank you.
Okay, let's take a roll call vote in that case.
Madam Mayor and council members, we have a motion by Councilmember Rouse, seconded by Councilmember Harmon, to 1, move the council direct an immediate administrative suspension of the ZIR program through reallocation of fiscal year 2020 appropriated resources or otherwise as the city administrator sees fit. The staff and city attorney are also directed and authorized to provide such assistance as is necessary for real estate brokers, agents, sellers, and buyers in order to implement the administrative suspension without negative impacts on current transactions. And 2, move that council waive full reading and adopt a resolution of the council of the city of Santa Barbara initiating zoning text amendments to convert the zoning information report program into a records disclosure law.
Very good.
Mayor Pro Tem Friedman.
Yes.
Councilmember Gutierrez.
Yes.
Councilmember Harmon.
Yes.
Councilmember Rouse.
Aye.
Councilmember Sneddon.
No.
Councilmember Dominguez.
Yes.
Mayor Murillo.
No. Is that passed 5-2?
5-2 with noes from Councilmember Sneddon and Mayor Murillo.
Very good. Mr. Casey, do you need anything else? Mr. Kalan, anything else? We'll go ahead and close this item. Folks, we have one more item on the agenda, so if you would leave quietly, please, we would be grateful. We're on to the part, we're postponing our closed session, Mr. Casey. So now it's time for council member committee assignment reports. I'll go first. I don't see any lights. I attended the South Coast Task Force on Youth Safety. That's our gang prevention collaborative on the South Coast. We got a report from UCSB professor they conducted a youth needs assessment. And what was interesting to talk to at-risk youth was how much poverty really affected their lives. And they talked about only having 2 changes of clothes when they're going to school and how embarrassing that is. So Mr. Gutierrez was there with me, and Emily Hay, Ms. Sneddon's intern, and so we're holding it down in gang prevention. The SB CAG met. They've submitted a big grant request related to the 101 widening. It's going to be another 4 or 5 years until that project is completed. There was also a big discussion at SB CAG about public outreach related to SB 375 and reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So SB CAG is looking for a public relations firm to do that work. And then on last Thursday with Home for Good, I was part of a pop-up day center for the homeless at Christ Presbyterian Church. Thank you to Christ Presbyterian for having it. It went smoothly without a lot of problems, so we're hoping that they will do it on a regular basis where we help people get off the street and into a place where there's resources, snacks, respite. There were some cots, and so we're doing our best to move people off the street into some help, into support services, and then hopefully into housing. So those were my activities. And then, of course, I was part of the Sustainability Committee and the Community Choice Energy Committee, but you heard at the first item today all the work we had been doing there. Mr. Friedman, your turn.
Great. Thank you, Madam Mayor. I, too, attended the Community Choice Energy Subcommittee, the Arts Advisory Committee, where they went over their recommendations for this year's grant awards. Also attended Beacon, where we discussed Port Hueneme and sand replenishment issues, among other things, in the Goleta Kelp Project to help restore kelp beds for Goleta Beach, and then also the Maritime Museum annual luncheon, and Councilmember Sneddon was there, and it was a really great event. I think the Maritime Museum is one of our treasures in our community, and there is discussion now out of that luncheon about having, when they do their cardboard kayak races, that we will have elected officials have a competition to see who can have the longest floating cardboard. So stay tuned next year for all of us electeds.
We'll let the young people do that. Ms. Sneddon?
Yes, I think that might be the fastest sinking cardboard ship. But so I thank you for mentioning my intern, Emily Hay. I'm very pleased with her. She's a student from Cal Poly, and she's very interested in environmental activities. So she also attended with me this week the Sustainability Committee, Community Choice, their final meeting there. She was able to attend the Creeks Committee meeting where they discussed water quality studies, and something that keeps coming up is the impact on our creeks that homeless encampments are having, and that's something that continues to need to be addressed. I also attended the AUD public workshop at the library. That was very well attended. A lot of planning commissioners and our usual people who care about planning were present, and it was very well run and well attended. Attended the Water Commission meeting, continuing discussion on fats, oil, grease, the RFP for that, and then also our sewer lateral inspection program, which will be coming back to council for a thorough presentation. I think we all met with the Old Spanish Days Presidenta Barbara Carroll and Eric Davis, and Fiesta's coming up, so that's we got our schedules and things.
Is it next week?
Next
all right.
week. Also attended the Maritime Museum event, which was really fantastic, and the outreach that community, that museum is doing for ocean curriculum and really educating our youth is really important. Also attended the COMB meeting, where we're continuing to talk about the phases of water quality management studies, and they're looking at everything over time, and also updates over the emergency pumping facility is still out, and we're not able to accept our state water until some of those fixes are in place that the Bureau is working on, the Bureau of Reclamation. And then I met with board members of Casa de la Raza and keeping up to date with them.
Thank you.
Very good. Mr. Dominguez.
Thank you. I attended Visit Santa Barbara's board meeting, the Veterans Housing and Homelessness Prevention Program, the Latino Business Awards, sponsored by the Pacific Coast Business Times, the Coastal Cities Group, which is a caucus of the League of Cities, California cities. That's it. Thank you.
All right. We don't have a closed session, so this meeting is adjourned.